no problem. Welcome, everyone. This is the November 26, 2018 meeting of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. Let's see, in terms of alternates, we have a full house today, so there are no alternates seated. However, I know there's a couple recusals, so Peter, if you would step in on those, that would be appropriate. Next is review and approval of the draft minutes of the October 22nd meeting. Has everyone had the opportunity to look at and review the meetings? Are there any questions, comments, revisions to those minutes? Nope.
Motion approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. Next is the director's report. Tricia.
I don't have anything of particular importance to report this month.
Okay. Very good. Okay, and finally, other business. Pat, you have consideration of revised bond guidelines?
So in your packets that were dropped off last week, there's a memo from me as well as a copy of our existing bond guidelines and a set of proposed bond guidelines. So the existing bond amounts, because I'm never going to get those two words together well, dates back to 1997 and range from small projects of 500 to 2,000 all the way up to in excess of 25,000 when you look at the 5 different category levels. So in looking back at what the purpose of our bonds are, which is to compel compliance with our permits, we now take routinely an amount of money associated with planting plans, usually a percentage somewhere between 20 and 50%, depending on the size of the planting plan. And then there's this normal sort of base bond amount, which is helpful to get maps filed and deed restrictions taken care of and surveys completed and things like that. When I look at the guidelines back from 97, it seems as though the amounts that we're taking exceed the amount necessary to compel compliance. So I have proposed new guidelines and put it, instead of 5 categories, knocked it down to 3 categories of minor, moderate, and substantial activities. The minor being 500 to 1,000, then 1,000 to 3,000, and then 3,000 to 10,000, with the caveat that this is not hard and fast. These are guidelines, and other applications may require specialized bonding amounts. Mm-hmm. So if it works for the agency, I would like to see us move towards lesser bond amounts, which is more customer-friendly, as you will. Laying out this amount of cash is difficult. It is a cash bond for people that they need to post, and I think our present exceeds what's necessary to get the job done.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Are there any agency questions or discussion on what's been proposed by Director Sesto on this? Okay, I would agree.
I've got a question. It says in your paragraph 3, to initiate a bond release, a letter or email requesting a final inspection shall be submitted, which doesn't seem to be the case a great deal of the time, because staff initiates bond releases as well.
We do, but generally, that would be the exception. Mostly we are, so there's the compliance officers who are out on the site on a regular basis, but then there's times when a survey is due to be submitted, so the inspections have dropped off because the site's no longer active, but they're not in compliance with their paper conditions. That's when somebody would be writing in, specifically would be writing in to say, I've completed all the conditions, may I have my bond back? That triggers a review of the site, again, by the compliance officer, and a re-review of the paper conditions. So it is normal for applicants to ask for their bond back. We don't, it's not our practice to initiate that. It's your responsibility to ask for it back.
Then I would suggest just a very small modification on that paragraph, to begin it by saying generally or normally.
I think that sends a mixed message. We would love 100% of the time for people to request their bonds back. Doreen goes out, if we have a stale bond, those are the times that staff would initiate it. But ideally, we should always be getting a letter to say, it's the most effective use of staff's time to respond to somebody saying, we're done,
Okay.
rather than us fishing for it.
Fine, it's not worth making an issue of.
So my question is more procedural. So you said that these haven't been reviewed since '97, right? So obviously, we're an agency. We have to follow certain administrative procedures, which we do conducting meetings. Is this the right procedure for amending the bond amounts? Is simply the director's initiative, or have you discussed this with any other governmental body? Or?
So whether, if you recall, 2 years ago, we did speak about bonds, and that's where we had consensus about the portion held for the planting plans. It is the discretion of the agency whether they ever require a bond or what that bond amount is. So it's not within our regulations, these amounts. So we don't have to do any formal process associated with changing our regulations. It's not a legal matter, it's really a policy that the agency...
What about bonds that exist and people then becoming aware of this new bond protocol? Is there any argument that a grandfathering type scenario? I mean, what if that's raised?
You adopt it, you set it into effect, and that's how we go from that point forward.
Okay. And so the rationale is just to bring them more in line with actual activities and needs, and as opposed to a more finite across-the-board criteria.
Correct.
Pat, question, at what point do we consider a bond to be stale and initiate contact with the property owner?
I'll turn that to Doreen.
We've gone through all the previous years that are well past. For anybody we can contact to release the bond. If there's any conditions, we let them know by giving them a letter. Typically, if we come across files that nobody's come forward to ask for their bond to be released, we review the file, send out a letter, let them know what they need to do to get it released. So we periodically go through them.
Okay, but it's not like something where if it's been 1 year?
So typically, we're following these applications, so we do the site inspections through the whole process, and so we know when they are completed. So we follow that up with a letter. And so we see it through the whole process, so mostly we don't lose them. And we can get the owners to do what they need to do to get their bonds back.
Okay, very good. Okay, any other agency discussion? Would someone like to make a motion on the director's proposal?
Motion to approve.
Okay,
As written.
is there, okay, all in favor? Okay, so moved, thank you. Okay, starting the public session.
Sorry, Brian,
Yes,
really quick before we go to the public session, I was going to mention that I attended, not just me, Alan and
Okay.
Norma as well, attended the Connecticut Association of Conservation and Inland Wetlands Commission's annual conference. I wanted to thank the town of Greenwich for sending us, picking up the registration fee, but I believe I can speak for all of us in saying that we found it very informative. It was my first time attending, Alan's as well,
Yes.
and there was a lot of really good information there, but also just some good networking with other wetland agencies, and I plan on attending future years, so it was definitely informative.
I also, I found it, well, I was very impressed by the quality of the presentations and very informative for my growing understanding of my role in the agency. And I then, after the meeting, spoke to the two attorneys who had been responsible for discussions not only about the wetlands law, but also the implications of recent court cases on how agencies like ours should deal with certain matters. And I asked them whether they would be prepared to give us all, as an agency, a similar tutorial. And they were open to do that, and in fact, they suggested that if you wanted us, or wanted them to do this, they would suggest that the town's attorney be present, since if there's ever a dispute, he will have to be in the front lines. So this is my suggestion, that maybe we ask Pat to contact these attorneys whose names are Janet Brooks and Mark Brands. I think she knows them, if you all think that this would be helpful.
Okay. Thank you. So I think we'll take that discussion offline. It sounds like it would potentially be helpful. Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other agency business before we go to the public session? No. All right. We have 2 consent approvals tonight. Excuse me, 2018-137, 26 Normandy Lane, and 2018-144, 469 and 471 North Street. Are there any questions or comments regarding any of these 2 applications? Okay, very good. Can I have a motion on the consent approvals, please? So
Motion to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on to pending applications, I'm going to recuse myself from item number 1, and so Mr. Benton, if you could take over, please.
Thank you. 0 Henry Avenue, application 2018-112. Redness and Mead for Thomas Gorin and Elizabeth Platt trustees. Mr. Clausen. Ms. Sesto.
Yes,
All right.
Bob has a family matter that he needed to take care of and will be joining us a little later. So I will do my best to fill in while we wait for him. So if you recall, the agency spoke of this back in our September meeting. There were some issues associated with the driveway placement and then some outstanding drainage questions. Since that time, the rain garden that was originally approved or originally proposed behind the house has been replaced by an infiltrator. This is looking towards a more realistic balance of the small parcel and use of the surface area associated with it. And then the driveway, which was an issue with regards to sight lines, has been moved 55 feet from the wetland. That's 10 feet closer than previously proposed in order to gain those sight line that are necessary. So with that, Bob has provided in his staff report special conditions for the agency's consideration with a recommendation to approve, and a special note that the ELS planting plan dated September 17, 2018 would be included as part of the permit granted. And also in your packets, there is a letter from a neighboring property owner, Phil Fuhr, describing concerns associated with flooding on the subject parcel.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Brett Holdsworth. I'm with Redness and Mead. So just here to talk quickly about the project itself. It's on a slightly larger than a 1.5 acre parcel in the R12 zone. It's currently vacant. The property above it is 32 Westcombe Wood Road, who owns the same property. They've been using it as an extended yard. They wish to construct a modest home with a driveway and associated patios. There is a wetland water course, intermittent water course, running along the western side of the property. Covers about 13% of the entire property. And with this proposal, there's a single-family house with a porous asphalt driveway, patios and walkways. The increase in impervious coverage is about 0.11 acres, about 4,000 square feet. The house is situated about 37 feet from the wetland, and the nearest disturbance is two drainage riprap outlets about 5 feet from the wetland. As Ms. Sesto mentioned, we submitted previously a design, and based on comments from DPW, we made modifications to the rain garden, now the location in the back, just for more usable flat lawn in the rear, and the driveway was shifted over 10 feet to accommodate better sight lines. Since then, we resubmitted and we received comments from DPW in support of the application, and they recommended moving forward with the permitting. In regards to the neighbor's letter, we submitted a thorough drainage report, and DPW found it consistent with the drainage manual. We are attenuating peaks from 1 to the 25-year storm. We're providing water quality volume. We're storing runoff reduction volume as required for an application such as this. So DPW has confirms that those measures are substantial for this type of application. So, if you have any further questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from the agency? Are there any public comments?
I have a question.
Oh, please,
Am I reading
turn your
this,
mic on.
sorry, am I reading this properly? Has this property never been built on?
That's correct.
So in this highly developed area, looking at a map, there's not one open plot in any direction.
Right, so if you go to CV1 with the colored, you'll see, you'll see all those houses have been developed, and the property is owned by the property to the north as well. They're two separate properties, but the property owners
Right.
both.
Has the property owner to the north owned the subject property for a very long time?
I believe so. I don't know the whole history of the property, but they've been using it as, an extended lawn area.
Okay.
All right, the owner is here, and he says he's owned the property for 69 years.
That's quite a while.
Any other agency comments? Are there any public?
I have a quick question. I was noticing the rain garden originally proposed was switched to a sub-ground infiltration.
Correct.
Can you just talk a little bit about that and the maybe the soil types and other things involved with making that sort of decision?
Sure. So the drainage manual requires 60% of the impervious coverage proposed to be treated through LID measures, rain gardens, permeable pavers, those such of things. And when we previously submitted, we were treating 100% of the proposed impervious. And DPW actually came back and said, this is more than what you were required to provide, and the rest, the 40%, could be just treated via conventional or non-LID measures. So DPW actually was a proponent for switching it to underground, which is kind of unusual in our but he's saying, that the flat, usable lawn for such small, properties is more realistic and what they were kind of thinking as a more realistic solution, and I think it worked out very good.
Since the neighbor is complaining in his letter about the volume going through the stream, if you had maintained the 100%, would that have mitigated some of his concern?
No, we're still treating 100% of the coverage. It's just infiltration and underground galleries are not considered LID, low impact development, and rain gardens and little pavers are. So we're still treating the same amount of runoff and volume. It's just in a different method.
I understand that you're treating it all, but would the underground galleries retain or restrain some of the flow at the peaks?
Yes, they're designed to attenuate the peaks. So they do the same type of design and system as a rain garden would. They're meant to infiltrate into the ground, like a rain garden. We did test pits, and we determined there was a chip layer, and they're above that.
No, maybe I'm missing the point. You said that in your original submission, you were treating 100%
As LID.
as LID.
Right. So.
And that would restrain the flow to the stream.
Both methods restrain the flow. It's just a difference between what the drainage manual considers low-impact development systems, such as rain gardens and forest pavers, versus a more older, conventional underground structure, concrete galleries. So in essence, they do the same thing. They provide water quality, they store the water. It's just the underground storage, you can create a flat lawn, and it's not, it's not a exposed rain garden. So it still attenuates the peaks and the flows towards the stream in the same fashion.
Does the system now that you're proposing, quote-unquote, store the same amount and let it go to the stream at the same rate that the previous one did?
I believe it probably changed a couple numbers here and there, but it's in essence the same amount. We still met the same requirements.
I think the issue is, in other words, if I understand what you said, you, in terms of what DPW said, you over-engineered the project. Is that a fair assessment? They told you didn't need to do as much as you were doing to be in compliance?
They said we didn't have to meet the LID requirements. So we still designed the same amount of peak reduction and water quality volume. We just did it in originally in a rain garden, and now it's underground.
Okay, I'm trying to be sensitive to the neighbor who took the time to write a very specific letter expressing concerns about the prospect of overflow over his driveway as a result of this proposed construction. And he implies that in the current environment, when we have a heavy rain, it's close to overflowing. He's obviously concerned that the new construction will cause sufficient disruption that there will be an overflow which disrupts his property. Now, are you suggesting that the proposal and the technology that you're going to use on this property will address his concern?
Yes, it will, because we have done the design and drainage calculations that we are reducing flows compared to what we have right today.
Any other comments from the agency?
No.
Do you have any public comment? Okay. Can I have a motion on this one?
Good, if you want to make it.
Motion to approve this application as stated.
I'll second that.
Good.
All those in favor?
All right.
Thank you very much.
It's not my favorite.
I guess somebody should go out and get. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again.
Okay. Moving on to application 2018-128, 42 Dublin Hill Road, Rocco V. DeAndrea, Inc., for SBP Dublin Hill LLC for a 5-lot subdivision. Mr. Clausy, please. Ms. Sesto, please.
Okay. As a recap, this is a 19-acre property that's being proposed for subdivision into 5 lots. There are wetlands in this area, and then a little off-site area over here. At the last meeting, the agency reviewed this in October and gave the opportunity to the applicant to respond to several issues with regards to tree retention, tightening up grading, DPW engineering requested additional information, and I don't know if the additional application fee was paid. Yes, it was?
All done, yes.
Excellent, okay. Since that time, the revised plans have been submitted, some grading has been tightened up, and there are, the loss of trees is not significantly lower, and I'm sure Mr. DeAndrea can speak to the requirements for grading, and much of it has to do with the driveway at the end of the cul-de-sac comes down alongside within our regulated areas, and that's a fixed location. The DPW requirements may have comments ready by the 26th. I think they did. Of the comments submitted by DPW, nothing is particularly of concern to this agency that would require meaningful changes on our end. So with that, Bob has recommended approval with the conditions set forward in the staff report.
Thank you.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Tony DeAndrea, representing Sound Beach Partners, SBP LLC. With me tonight is Bill Kenny, who prepared the land plan and restoration plan. And also with us is Duran Sabag, who is the representative of the applicant. We have made some relatively minor changes to the plan since our initial presentation to the agency. We've also satisfied DPW in the interim. DPW, just to get that out of the way, issued a favorable comment sheet dated November 16th. There were some minor issues that are related to each lot. And as you recall from our prior presentation, all of the runoff from the lots, there are 5 of them, are basically to the east, away from the wetland section, which is concentrated in a small pocket along the western boundary. The concerns of the agency when we met in October were to restrict the amount of filling or the extent of filling on the westerly side of the roadway in the open space. And what we've identified was the limit of existing lawn in the northern section of the open space. And what we propose to do now through Bill Kenny's plan is to restore that area, which is lawn, through a planting plan, which Bill had presented on his open space and wetland buffer planting plan, which he can speak to. There was also concern that we reduce or control the extent of the toe of slope along the driveway to lot number 5. And Bob had mentioned in his staff report the concern that we were going to lose 10 to 15 trees, and that's an accurate statement. So when you see Bill Kenny's landscape plan, you'll see that he's proposed to plant the same number of trees back in the area that had previously been maintained as lawn. So what we're able to do is maintain the wooded area, and I've defined that as a heavy dashed red line on the plan. It's also been suggested by Bob that we provide a stone or boulder demarcation feature. So we've agreed to that and indicated that on the plan. On this plan, which I've highlighted in color, is orange. That's a 10-foot mowing area along the shoulder of the driveway, which seemed reasonable to maintain as the access into the driveway. So there's just a small shoulder of lawn that would be maintained. In the northwest section of lot number 1, we had originally proposed galleries as a means of complying with the drainage manual. That's since been changed to a rain garden, which satisfied the comments from DPW. In addition, the agency had requested that we limit the amount of encroachment, so we proposed a limit of encroachment defined by a feature that will eliminate the existing driveway that comes in along the northern boundary of lot number 1. And that will also be restored in accordance with the landscape plan that Bill Kenny has prepared. In summary, we've met all the requirements of DPW. We've responded to the suggestions and comments and concerns expressed by the agency. We are restoring the area that is currently maintained as lawn on the north side of the roadway in the open space area. And we've controlled all of the runoff toward the wetland, but still maintain the same flow to keep the wetland hydrated. We've done that through a series of rain gardens and detention facilities that will meet the requirements of the drainage manual on lots 1 and 2 and still provide the ultimate discharge into the wetlands. In addition, we have a rain garden in the center cul-de-sac of the roadway, which is augmented by some subsurface galleries for additional detention. Unless there's some specific questions that I can answer, I believe that we responded to the concerns of the agency. Bill Kenny's here to respond to any questions about the landscape plan.
Okay.
Any other concerns?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. DeAndiero before we have Bill Kenny come up? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, good evening, Bill Kenny, landscape architect, wetland scientist, and soil scientist. The plan that I have just provided you with is the open space and wetland buffer planting plan that we've prepared for this project. It's showing just a portion of the project area focused on the western portion of the site and particularly the proposed open space lot, as well as the area of a proposed rain garden in the western portion of the property. We're showing a forested area. Primary components of this are to install some native plantings and remove existing lawn areas and ornamental landscape areas, and then also to implement a long-term management plan that's focused primarily on controlling invasive plants in the future. Much of the proposed open space is forested today and will remain forested, so we're showing that area that's on the western portion of the western and central portion of the open space area. And then in the northeastern portion is where existing landscaped area is and where some proposed temporary disturbances to allow for the construction of the proposed subdivision road and one driveway for one of the proposed lots. So we're showing a meadow seed mix to be planted there. In addition, some native flowering trees also to be planted in that meadow area. Lastly, there is the rain garden area, and we're showing a meadow seeding mix for the rain garden, and in addition, some shrub planting on the western side of that rain garden, in the area that's between the garden and the wetland that is off-site to the west. Do you have any questions?
Pinpoint the trees that you're newly planted trees versus those which are being removed?
Yes. The proposed trees are these darker green circles through this area right here.
The trees are shown on a variety of plans, but the plan I have in front of you is sheet 2 of 3. It's a sediment and erosion control plan. It was part of the abbreviated set that we submitted to the agency for convenience, if you will, at the suggestion of staff, so that you can see the whole scope of plans. But if you look closely, you'll see the 15 or so trees along the western side of the accessway into lot number 5. Some of those trees are actually within lot number 4 and within the accessway to lot number 5. So all told, the construction of that accessway will cost us about 10 to 15 trees, as Bob pointed out. Within the open space, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Bill Kenny has proposed the replacement of that to improve the conditions within that area that had been previously maintained as lawn. So while we're not jamming them in on the narrow strip along the accessway, because just to the west of that is a very densely wooded natural area along the accessway to lot number 5. So we decided to concentrate the improvements by the trees in that area, still west of the roadway, but within the area that's currently maintained as lawn. So the proposal is to restore that area as a buffer with the shade trees and eliminate the grass.
Bill, the types of trees that are removed, I assume are canopy trees? Overstory?
That's correct.
Can you speak to your decision to go with understory trees as replacements?
It was, if the area, our proposal was to maintain the area as a meadow edge along that forest. And so rather than having up canopy trees to shade that out over time, we went with the understory trees. We could certainly add in canopy trees if you'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it's open space, so it's common land on the edge of woods that you're going to have to require, some targeted sort of management that in the long run, to me, doesn't seem practical. I think the better long-range plan for that would just to set it back to forest. And I think having the understory trees as a transition in is lovely and will complement the neighborhood. But I think it deserves to have canopy trees.
So you can mix in, you're okay with keeping some of the understory?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So maybe add in half as many again, canopy trees?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so Pat, that'd be 5 to 6, it looks like.
Yeah, call it 6.
Canopy trees, call it 6 canopy trees. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Kenny or Mr. DeAndrea from the agency? Any public questions or comments on this particular application? No? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, and that's with the additional condition of 6 canopy trees being
To be
added
added.
to the landscaping plan. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is 2018-130, 120 Perkins Road. Rocco V. DeAndrea, Inc. for Burning Tree Country Club to dredge ponds and stabilize stream banks. Patricia, please.
Okay. I should note that members Rogers, Curlin, Schondorf, and Rossi visited the site with the site superintendent, Steve Wickstrom, I believe is here this evening. So at the last meeting in October, when this was discussed, there were questions outstanding with regards to the methodology in which the plan utilized to come up with the proposed dimensions of the watercourses and dredging, as well as some questions with regards to the nature of whether dredging would mechanical dredging or suctioning out the water bodies, and then utilizing shore socks to reinforce the banks. Since that time, the agency was provided with a narrative Burning Tree Country Club waterway improvement plans. There is no author associated with this, so the professional expertise that went into this I cannot attest to. So with regards to the dimensions of the channel, the general dimensions are going to be to excavate 1.5 to 2 feet worth of sediment associated with the channels. The width of the channels are identified as being 10 to 20 feet in width. The ponds, the proposal is to dredge from 2 to 6 feet worth of material there. An exact plan of how wide each section has not been provided, so there remains a fair amount of uncertainty as to what the end result of the project will be. Within the submitted documentation, there's a stated goal of restoring these water bodies to their original condition, but it's not well substantiated what the original condition was, upon what information is the applicant determining as being original. There's a statement that they are restoring these water bodies to bring them into compliance with BMPs, but I'm not sure what BMPs would be associated with pond dredging and what restoration that this is meant to achieve. The stated goals also include increasing the water holding capacity and drainage capabilities while improving water quality and aquatic habitat, but there's no explanation associated with how these things will be achieved. Excavating out to make a basin deeper, especially noting that Burning Tree is largely a wetland, was largely a wetland. You're just digging a deeper hole in a saturated area, so the capacity is not necessarily changing, so that goal is uncertain. The response plan does include showing where these shore socks are proposed to be installed along the banks of the brook, but the erosive water velocities flow through this portion of the project area, and the applicant has not provided information to assure the agency that the shore socks reinforced shoreline will actually restore the watercourse to a sustainable fluvial morphological configuration, which means, in short, there's erosion problems out there, so simply putting these socks along an unspecified area, either mimicking what's there, or there was discussion in the field about reconfiguring what the bank is. If the configuration of the socks pushes water flow in a new direction, you can produce new erosion patterns. The socks can be undermined if there's not taken into consideration what the current erosion patterns are. And for the stream, if the plan is to dredge 1.5 to 2 feet down, and not knowing how tall a sock is, floodwaters, how do you know the floodwaters aren't just going to simply overtop that sock? So my takeaway from this is I don't disagree with necessarily with the goals that the country club is seeking to obtain. There's just not sufficient information to validate what's being proposed is actually going to achieve their goals, let alone not damage the watercourse. There are sections that are 10 to 20 feet, and that is due to erosion, past practices where the floodplain was made into lawn, the low-flow channel has been either modified or by its own erosion patterns spread out, which is not a healthy watercourse. We don't want streams of that size, or that flow amount, to be spread out over 10 to 20 feet. A responsible restoration of this would be calculations that would say what is the appropriate width of the watercourse for this amount of flow, what are the peak flows, and what's the floodplain of this watercourse look like, and then design from there. I wholly appreciate that this is a watercourse that weaves in and out through various golf course elements, but by the text that was provided, there is an intent to make areas that continually flood to be vegetated with rough material. So I think that the superintendent understands that there's a fight going on out there between water and uses, and they are moving towards a more responsible riparian expectation and even restoration, but there's just still pieces that don't address the fluvial morphology of the stream. There's plans for sediment forebays or in-stream check dams that can control some sediment. This was discussed up by the 6th Fairway Channel and the eastern end of the 4th Fairway Channel up by the Merritt. There was, on the upstream side of the culvert, there was obvious erosion, which would suggest that the culvert is undersized and that there's erosion of the banks as the water is sort of churning, trying to get through that culvert. So by more specific engineering evaluation of appropriate locations for those sediment basins and what is necessary to retain that slope would be appropriate. Details of the erosion sedimentation controls to be used during the mechanical dredging of the channels need to be provided. The plan, as stated, is looking to do the dredging without, there's no dewatering aspects associated with this. The concept of using a silt curtain in a moving water course is not appropriate. Silt curtains, sediment curtains are frequently used in the parallel with the flow, so that if you need to isolate a section of the water course from the main flow channel, the sediment curtains do not come across a water channel. The flow, as you would imagine, just goes under it or over it, so that's an inappropriate expectation there. So much more detail is warranted in the watercourse areas with respect to how sediment's going to be managed during construction. Let's see. The analytical testing of the sediment samples came out good, so that's a plus. Plans depicting the upland disposal areas with access ways, erosion sedimentation controls, and stabilize needs to be specified. 4 disposal areas were identified in the plan, including a grove of mature maple trees, which would be inappropriate to dispose of material there. The roots will simply be suffocated and the trees will die. That was something that was discussed in the field, and I think it's the intent of the applicant to use that. That's the maple grove between the 6th and 7th fairway. The other sites are outside the 100-foot regulated area and would be suitable. The location and dimensions of vegetated filter strips, the 4 buffer zones using pollinator plants, which kudos to Burning Tree for recognizing that need and accommodating it, and wetland grasses totaling about half an acre are indicated. in the response. And that, again, is a good example of the culture of the country club moving some more sustainable choices, and they actually have bees on the property that they are looking to accommodate, which is quite good. The new areas are to be sodded with fescue and designated as no-mow areas, so to create a buffer between the watercourses and areas of the watercourses and fertilized areas. That's an asset to the watercourses overall. And then with regards to the pond dredging, the two areas that are more marsh-like than pond area, which are immediately alongside the road that this agency saw within the last year to have that road raised because of flood concerns. I'm not sure the rationale behind excavating those areas. The marsh vegetation is actually a good thing for filtering out some of those pollutants prior to getting to open water. And it's not these are sort of obscure lobes to the pond, so the preference would be to keep them as is. So a fair amount that we are hoping the applicant has got some good responses to.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Tony DeAndre, representing Burlington Country Club. I'm kind of the coordinator of the various sources of information that have come in from Steve Wickstrom, who's here tonight, representing the club, back along with Mike Hibbert, who's the president of the club at this time. I should start by saying that it was never the intent of the club to put forth a plan that was designed to improve aesthetics. That's not the objective of the plan. It was also not the intent to channelize the stream. I think it also might be, in retrospect, fair to say that the choice of words to bring it back to original condition was not quite accurate, because if we were to do that, it would not be a golf course, and it would be a very large wetland in our current vernacular. But what we do recognize is that there is a significant amount of deterioration of the channel as it exists south of, I call it the causeway, which was the subject of your one application that you approved to raise the elevation of that road slightly and to resurface it and replace the culverts. I was not involved in that application. I did watch it proceed. I didn't see that there was any particular difficulty during the construction to control the flow out of the pond to the west of the causeway. So I think that can be addressed. So the primary objective of the application was to stabilize the channels throughout the course, and in so doing, recognizing that there is an inflow of sand and silt from off-site sources from the western end and from the north being the primary source of the sediment coming in off Merrick Parkway. It comes in across what we refer to as fairway number 4. It then flows through a series of narrow channels and then has basically silted in the pond at number 4, along the south side of number 4. Ultimately, that flows into the main irrigation pond, which was recently dredged under an application through this agency, which was very successfully done without any adverse impact on the water courses downstream. It was never our intent to quantify the amount of volume or peak rates of flow through the course, because when those conditions occur, the course serves its primary function, which is detention to a great deal, such as the depth of water ponding on the 10th fairway can reach 3.5 to 4 feet. I've been watching this now for 20 years or so. I've gotten and taken historic markers of the extent of the flooding. It's extensive. It is significant. But that's not what causes the deterioration of the channel. The channel has been suffering from just standard everyday flow. There is no significant vegetation along the edges of the channel that can hold it. In some places, the golf course has been at fault for the maintenance of the golf course is at fault for having put too much fairway too close. The major factor, in my opinion, having watched it and also having been involved in trying to protect it, is the type of soil in the area where it was manipulated when the course was constructed. So we have a very fine, silty, organic soil, and it has no stabilization. So this firm in Biodredge has come along and proposed the use of what they call the socks. And having seen pamphlets and videos on the installations, I was initially skeptical until I saw how they operate. And what the intent is on the design is to take the areas of the channel south of the causeway and to install the socks. They call them socks. They're porous fabric, which is placed in the edge of the channel, filled with the material out of the channel, then folded over, stapled into the ground, and then planted with the material, fescue in this case is being what's proposed, so that they, by their own weight and vegetation that will now grow in and through and on top of the socks, will serve to stabilize the channel. And the reason they suggested to tell you that the channel will be 10 to 20 feet wide, that's because that's what's there today, and we want to maintain that so it doesn't get any worse. So that's the main thrust on the channel. We can predict the total volume of inflow into the watershed, but certainly the channels on the golf course were never designed or intended to carry that flow. So what we're looking to do is protect the channel against the low flow periods, because, as I said before, when you hit the peak, after it reaches the top of the causeway, which serves as a dam and stores water across the upper fairways, you've got a flooded condition. The velocity is not the main concern. In regard to the dredging of the ponds, certainly, as I said, you've taken over since 1965, I think was when the course was constructed, we've been handling or receiving runoff from the parkway all those years. And as we know, during the winter, they use a lot of sand, and that sand ends up in the channels, which end up in number 4. So that's the primary reason we're dredging number 4. I don't think, again, it's appropriate to say we want to bring it back to original condition because none of us have evidence of exactly what that is. But we want to dredge it down to create a depth that has some quality of water in the ponds. In regard to the concern for excavating next to the causeway, obviously it wasn't going to be excavated right up to the edge. The intent is to have a shelf that may not have been detailed sufficiently in the materials that have been presented by Biodredge, but they can be strengthened in that regard. The idea is to create a shelf, then a deep basin, typical or consistent with what was presented when we dredged number 9 irrigation ponds. The sediment basins would require some additional detailed field work. That request for those is certainly a good one, and the locations of them have been identified primarily at the upstream side of the 4th fairway. There's a limited amount of area there to work with, but perhaps by manipulating the location of the culvert, which provides a cart path crossing, we can create a little bit more room to create the settling basin that's required. Yes, there is evidence of erosion around that culvert. I do agree that the volume of that inflow should be determined and quantified and designed accordingly. It may be that it's necessary to have a larger culvert in the channel between the 2 parts of the fairway, which are separated by the water course coming in from number 4. I think those of you who were able to attend the field meeting could see the problems that are occurring in the south channel. Along the other channels, along between fairways number 4 and 5, those are shallow channels that have been encroached upon. And in those locations, the use of the socks would be to define the channel more regularly so that the fairway doesn't continue to encroach as the channel erodes. So perhaps the application should have been done in 2 parts, one of which was the dredging of the pond. At this point, I would hope that that's something the agency could see to allow the process to continue or start through the winter, while perhaps we can demonstrate how the socks will be installed in a section of the channel so that the agency feels a little more comfortable with the concept. I think the membership and the leadership of the club is intent upon stopping the erosion of the channel, which obviously has a problem for other water courses and water bodies downstream. The depth of material coming out of the channel will certainly vary. As an estimate, perhaps it's a foot. In some places, it might be 2. But once again, that's not the intent. The intent is to just remove enough material to create the socks and remove the silt that has collected. Because if you were able to see on the plan that we presented, there's virtually no elevation differential from the causeway to the edge of the property. It's extremely flat, so that there's not a lot of velocity in the flow. So again, most intent upon stabilizing the edges. If the agency is able to see clear to allow the dredging of number 4 to commence this winter, that I think would be very productive while we develop more detail on the sediment basin and perhaps include a section downstream of the causeway to demonstrate the practicality of the silt socks. And you can see the dredging methodology. In regard to how that would occur, the discussion has been that the Burning Tree has the capacity to pump water with pumps that they own. So similar to what was done when you did the culvert crossing on the causeway, you can build a dam in a small section of the channel, divert the water through pumping while you work in a limited section downstream. And that would be leapfrogging down the channel while you're mobilized, and you can control the extent of the work. Downstream, you can add additional protections in the way of check dams across. One of the pamphlets that was mentioned by Bob Clausey that was submitted by Burning Tree provides some concepts on how to filter the water farther downstream or within the channel. And because they would be working in small sections, the control of the turbidity and the sediment loss is practical to consider. So if we have any direct questions or comments that perhaps we can see a way to move forward, it would be appreciated.
Okay.
I know the main issues, as Director Sesto has pointed out, there are some engineering details that should be provided specifically in regard to the sedimentation basins and their actual design. We can work with DPW to discuss the idea of peak flow versus ponding and flooding, which is really the primary function of Burning Tree during a peak storm event. And Steve Wickstrom has been identifying other disposal areas within the course for the excess material that will be developed during the dredging of the pond. And those that Pat pointed out are outside the upland review area, so I think that we'd be okay. We do agree that the suggested use of the area between fairways 5 and 6 and 7 would not be appropriate because there is a grove of shallow rooted maple trees in there.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Questions for Mr. DeAndrea?
Just that you made a comment that you were skeptical about the socks. What was
Initially, I was.
Yeah, why? What was your concern?
Because the concern was whether or not they would be up and above the edge of the channel. But in the actual design,
Because of the embedded?
The bottom of the sock is down at the bottom of the channel, basically at the bottom of what's now eroded. So the unique aspect of them is they can be tailored, I was going to say tapered, be tailored to taper into the adjacent boundary. So I had initially, when they were describing this, I said, you got to think in terms of volume, what's happening to the volume. Then when I see the videos and the other documents, it proves that the top of the sock, so-called, they called it socks, S-O-X, is level with the adjacent ground. They can be mounded up if necessary, but the primary intent is to be level with the adjacent property, wrap around, it's basically.
And then the
like a teardrop.
vegetation,
It becomes
yeah.
like a teardrop shape on its side. So anchored in on the adjacent solid ground, and then filled with the material that was in the channel, and then, which is native to the whole course, and then planted with material that will then root in and stabilize it. Right now, along the channel, there was really nothing done. There was no stone revetment, there's no channel walls, and as the shallow-rooted trees extend out, there's nothing to hold those shorelines. So, and I think you saw that along the 10th fairway in a number of places. In some places, you saw drain pipes sticking out maybe 6 feet. That's how much has eroded. So again, we're not looking to channelize it straight down 10 to 12 feet wide all the way. That's not the intent. The erosion has occurred where the natural flow path has taken it. As it deposits silt on the inside, it tends to push out on the outside. Then it bounces off and takes it out on the other side. That's the way we get the Mississippi Delta. So we're trying to prevent that from continuing and becoming worse and worse. So I really do think that if it's possible to mobilize on the dredging aspect of number 4, and then be able to demonstrate, if you will, a section of the SOX, I think the agency would be more comfortable with the idea. Otherwise, we're not looking to try to place boulders along the edges of the channel or artificially fill in the areas that have been eroded. That's not the intent. It's to utilize the material that's already been deposited in the location where it exists, fold it back into the natural soil, and stabilize the channel to prevent further widening of the channel to the detriment of downstream as well as the golf course.
Okay. Tony, could you talk a little bit more about determining whether a bigger culvert is needed as part of this?
The bigger culvert on number 4?
Right.
I'd have to quantify what's coming in there. We have not done that, that's true. I think that too often the objective of the golf course is not to have a large drain, pipe, or culvert in the middle of the fairway. So over the years, it's evolved. And each time it evolves, it got a little bigger perhaps, but never size. So no one has ever designed that channel, right? And as a result of it, when a significant volume comes in from the highway on a intense storm, it's going to exceed that it may exceed that capacity, and apparently it has on occasion.
Okay.
Tony, are there any other courses in the Northeast that have used these socks?
I'm not aware that Steve may have comment on that.
Good evening, Steve Wickstrom from Burning Tree Country Club. Enviro Dredge, who are the installers, are out in Texas, and they've done a lot of work in Florida and south, out in California. I'm not sure about the Northeast. If you were going to see them firsthand, I don't know if there's any in the Northeast.
Even if it hasn't been in the Northeast, how many years' experience do they have using this technology in the places in the South where they've been using it?
I believe they've had a patent for 3 to 4 years. So when they started to install them, they have a pretty extensive website. There's more information there. It's a few years out, though.
Okay. Thank you. I guess a question for Pat. Agency reactions for what Tony is proposing about pond number 4? And how would you go about separating that piece out from the balance of the application if that indeed was something we want to consider?
So the applicant would have to effectively withdraw the elements of the application, the water course or these other outlying areas, so it would redefine a narrower scope to just that one pond. And then they'd have to reapply to come back in with the other things. And with regards to the pond, there's still elements that, pond dredging can be a very straightforward process. Part of what we need to do is, one, create a record, and part of that record is then used by our compliance officers to go out and say, yep, this is what was approved or not. The discussion of what the intent is not enforceable. So if the intent is to have emergent shelves, that should be shown. If the intent is not to excavate out those marshy areas, then that should be shown. It's just lacking the details. If dewatering, last time we heard you didn't have to dewater the ponds because you were doing the suction dredge. And is that still the plan going forward?
Yes, for the ponds, that's still
Still a
the
plan going forward, okay.
preferred approach.
Good. So, yes, so some more details need to come in. I mean, I don't have a philosophical issue with dredging the pond, and the context in which it sits is fine. Just not sure, based on what we've got in the record now, I could not go out and, if I saw something, go, well, that's not what I thought it was going to be.
Right. Okay.
Understood.
Thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense.
Is there another question?
No.
So, in summary, what you need from Burning Tree is a more detailed plan of the pond profile for dredging, and limits of excavation, more defined than what has been presented so far by EnviroDredge.
Yes.
In addition, I don't know how to handle the concerns about the channel stabilization, whether or not you have some competence in that approach or totally out in left field. Is that a no?
No, this is a no confidence. There is nothing in the plans that I identify as doing what's appropriate for the stream. Maintaining a 10 to 20 foot wide section and dredging that by or foot and a half to 2 feet is not what's best for that stream. So I don't think that there's been an appropriate acknowledgement of how a stream should naturally operate, how it's operating out there, and how the golf course needs it to operate, and bringing those pieces together.
So I just wanted to clarify, it's not that the channel is going to be 10 to 20 feet wide, it was
In
intended
places
to
it-
be whatever it is.
And where it is 10 to 20 feet wide is bad. It's an indication of a malformed water course. So that should be repaired, not exacerbated.
Okay, so stabilizing it where it is not something that you're in favor of considering.
Not in conjunction with dredging, no.
Okay, so the alternate is then to become more channelized in a consistent
A
with-
low-flow channel would be appropriate. And then addressing what a floodway for the channel, for the water course would be, and what the floodplain of the water course would be.
But that may, taken literally, result in significant structural changes to the channel and the golf course, which would be unappealing, I believe, speaking for the club, and potentially unattainable.
That may be, but throwing a
The alternate is to
dredging-
maintain status quo, which can be proven to be detrimental downstream, because one needs only to look in the pond downstream from Burning Tree to see the effects of.
Well, basically,
flow.
what's been proposed, I don't know that it's going to actually solve the problems.
The problem that we're trying to solve is the continued erosion of the channel. That was the objective. But we'll have to take that, I think that, speaking for the president, you're probably reading and understanding what the concerns are of the agency and the director, so they have to consider those options relative to the channel. I think the pond aspect is more easily addressed.
Yes.
Because it would not be adversely impacting the flow. In fact, it was intended to improve conditions there. Okay. Any other questions? Understood?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Public questions, comments on this application? No? Okay, may I have a motion?
Motion to delay?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need an extension on this?
Yes.
Oh,
Good catch.
yes, we need an extension
Get that.
for this. Okay, thank you. Okay.
No, but, day after tomorrow.
Okay, moving on to new applications for review. First one is 2018-111,
Kate.
16 Lakeview Drive, Edison Carabali for Mariano Carlos Lozano to maintain a stone path and floating dock within wetlands. Doreen, please.
This one will need to be delayed to the December 17th agency meeting.
Okay. Do you need a motion on that, or just we're pushing
No,
it off?
no.
Okay, very good. Next is 2018-134, 18 Grahampton Lane, Frangione Engineering LLC for Green Hill Associates LLC to remedy clearing, grading, and construction of a stone wall in and adjacent to wetlands. Doreen, please.
Okay, so on this property, there are two wetlands. One is located on the eastern portion of the property, here. It's a fairly dense stand of deciduous forest. The other is a small wetland on the southwestern portion that continues off-site onto neighboring properties. The homeowner is seeking to maintain a stone wall within the wetland and buffer at the southwestern corner of the property that measures between 18 and 24 inches wide and will be 5 feet high along this southern property boundary. The area disturbed is approximately 100 feet by 10 feet and extends about 2 to 3 feet into the wetland. The stone wall is being constructed and is of mortar construction, so water can't penetrate or filter through it. According to the engineer on site, the stormwater flows east to west along the property line and outwards towards the wetland. So therefore, there's no blockage of the flow of water, and therefore weep holes are not required. The engineer should provide certified confirmation that the existing stormwater drainage system will accommodate the increased impervious coverage that is being created by the wall. Planting plan to restore the area around the retaining wall was previously approved under the permit for the construction of the new house and the associated activity. It consists of 1 native tree, 40 shrubs, and 65 herbaceous plantings. Also approved on that plan is a demarcation feature that consists of a split rail fence. 5 of the existing trees on the planting plan that was provided no longer exist on site. According to the project narrative, recent storms resulted in trees falling over, damaging the stone wall along the southern property line. These trees should be replaced with shade trees, 2 to 2.5 inch caliper. Any fill that was deposited within the southwestern wetland buffer adjacent to the shed should be removed. And then looking at the eastern wetland on the opposite side of the house, staff compared the existing survey map that shows trees 6 inches in diameter or greater and the planting plan against the field conditions. An estimated approximately 10 trees had been removed within this wetland and buffer area. A planting plan utilizing shade trees size 2 to 2.5 inch in caliper should be provided to restore the removed trees in the approximate location where they had been removed. The issuance of an order is recommended with the conditions that are provided in the staff report.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. For the record, Rob Frangione, Frangione Engineering. We have no objection to the comments and recommendations, and simply here to answer any questions should you have them.
Okay, thank you. Any agency questions for Mr. Frangione? No? Public questions or comments on this? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Motion to issue the order as recommended.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next is application 2018-135, 41 Edel Lane, Carl Freiberg and Evelyn Peterson for after-the-fact application for a footbridge and restoration of a wetland. Doreen, please.
There's a watercourse and a small wetland fringe along the northern property boundary that flows west to east, continuing off-site to the Byram River. The area along the stream is sparsely vegetated with grasses and herbaceous vegetation, and further east along the stream, the area is forested. This past September, the homeowners were cited for a violation that included the removal of vegetation along the banks of the stream in an area about 40 feet by 23 feet, the creation of a rock dam in the stream, and the installation of a footbridge. The applicants are proposing to restore the vegetation along this disturbed riparian zone and maintain the footbridge. The rock dam has been removed from the stream. The footbridge was built on site, and it's been placed on grade with no abutments. The property is not within a flood zone or a floodway, so it's not likely to have adverse impacts to the wetland or to the stream. Primarily, the vegetation that was removed consists of Japanese knotweed. There are several woody shrubs that still exist that were not removed. The owners plan to continually hand remove the knotweed and mulch around the new plantings. They are aware of the tenacious nature of the weed, but they don't want to use any chemicals, so they plan to just keep at it. They're proposing to plant 1 tree, 29 shrubs, and a variety of perennials to restore the disturbed wetland buffer. I can't get this anymore. Up in this northeastern location. The sizes of the proposed plantings are acceptable. We should receive a method to protect the plantings from browsing or from rubbing from deer. Otherwise, it's recommended that the agency issue an order with the conditions provided.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. Do you have anything to add, or are you in agreement with the?
No, it was ignorance, which is not a valid excuse, since we have become aware of a Wetlands Commission.
Okay.
We're aware.
Okay, excellent.
We've been compliant, fully engaged, and our planting plan has benefited from the recommendations of the Wetlands Committed Plantings. It is, I would like to aggrieve our fee/fine. It is a small property and a small house, and it's a retirement house for an elderly couple in their 70s. I know, it's hard to believe, but we are. The 1,700 square foot house, the planting budget is $1,900. We'll be doing the planting ourselves, as we've done on all our properties, and the only vegetation removed was Japanese knotweed. So we request that our fine just revert to the fine and not the tripled fine plus fees. We are a retired couple on a fixed income.
Okay.
That's all.
So you're requesting a reduced fine due to financial hardship?
Well, and also feel that it's disproportionate to the size of both the,
Okay.
you know, we had no idea. We would never have allowed a fee to triple to a fine. That just is foolish.
Okay. Fair enough.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you very much.
Sure. Agency comments, discussion on the requested fine reduction?
What are the numbers?
Doreen, could you give us the
The amount
numbers?
was $4,500. The original fee is $1,500, and that was times 3.
Okay,
So the amount on the table is 4,500.
Correct.
yeah.
I think we ought to take it back to the 1,500.
I agree.
Okay, that's a motion? Okay, motion to, you want to put that into a total
Make a
motion?
motion to reduce the fine from $4,500 to the original fee of $1,500.
Okay. Okay, all in favor?
Well, you want to issue an order as well.
Oh, yeah, you're also issuing the order to
Yes,
correct as part of that
yes,
motion.
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye. Question for Doreen. How did
Thank
you
you.
arrive at the bond amount at 50%?
That's standard.
Is that our standard now, 50?
Depending on the scale of the violation and the size of the planting plan, we can do it 100% or 50. I felt that it was a relatively minor violation for the removal of the invasive Japanese knotweed.
So this is going to be an additional
Right, they'll have to,
$950.
right. And we'll keep that for the years that the plantings are establishing.
So 4 years.
Yes.
Okay. Next is application 2018-136, 307 Shore Road, Aquarian Water Company for replacement of water main along Shore Road, 2 feet from wetlands. Pat, please.
Bob.
Or Doreen, whoever's covering this. Oh, there's Bob.
Bob's here.
Bob's back. Oh, hi,
Bob's
Bob, you
back.
snuck in.
Aquarian Water Company is replacing about 2 miles of water main going out to Field Point Circle. The section, there are only 2 sections of that 2-mile main that come anywhere near a wetland. On sheet C2, it shows the main and some of the lateral work to the service the individual houses along Shore Road are within the upland review area of a wetland, actually 3 wetlands. And the spot where it becomes 5 feet from the western wetland is just one of these service tie-ins. It's not the large main itself. The second area where it comes within an upland review area is on Smith Road. That's shown on sheet C3. The main would be about 35 feet from a pond on a private residential property. There are some other sheets that have information that I drew members' attention to in my staff report. I recommend the agency issue a permit with the conditions provided. The applicant is here this evening if you have any questions, for instance, how long they anticipate the work within the upland review areas to take. But with standard erosion controls and dewatering measures if necessary in the trench, this should not have any wetland impact.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Welcome.
Hey, my name's Dan Iniselli, and I'm here with Kleinfelder Engineering, also with Tom Lodo from Kleinfelder, and then the representative of the applicant, Brendan Pimian from Aquarian Water.
Okay.
And we agree to all of the recommendations that you guys have put forward. And if you have any specific questions, I have a clarification of where we're putting sedimentation barriers, et cetera, on here, but if you have any specific questions, just please.
Okay. All right.
When
Thank
is this project getting done? Or started, at least?
It's going to start in the spring of next year,
And expected duration?
6 to 8 months.
Okay. Wrapping up in the middle of the traffic season down there. Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Any public questions or comments on this application?
Nothing good.
Okay. Someone like to make a motion, please?
Motion to approve?
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Jay seconds, all in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
I like your slogan, bright people.
Okay, next is 2018-138, 9 Sabine Farms Road, SE Minor and Company, Inc., for Jill Dial, or Dial, for residential additions, porch, garage, and driveway 50 feet from wetlands. Bob, please.
I don't even know what it is. It's a planting plan. Let's see. This is a pretty sizable property on Sabine Farm Road, 9.3 acres. Most of the work that's going to take place is going to take place beyond the upland review area of this wetland, which is located in the northeast corner of the property and extends off-site to the north and east. The only activities that do take place in the upland review area are construction of part of this detached garage, construction of this pervious motor court, and some drainage outfalls and things like that. The closest activity is this outfall here. It's about 8 feet from the edge of the wetland. This wetland is pretty much lawn. There are some scattered large trees, and then over in the far northeast sector, it grades into a sort of a meadowy and meadow and woods. Woods are more or less off-site. Let's see. The issue I had in reviewing this application was the condition of the wetland. There are a lot of activities going on. This is a fairly substantial intensification of the land use on the property. I think there are a lot of opportunities for enhancement of the wetland. And so
This looks good.
Okay, so I understand, oh, yes, so Mr. Liebman handed out a planting plan just now, which is basically going to restore the whole wetland. And so that looks good. There are conditions in the permit that, hang on, no, the agency would have to add a condition here about some sort of a hold on a proportion of percentage of the bond, or a percentage of the planting plan cost, which is recommended at 2 years, and a demarcation feature along the edge of the planted area. Both of those would have to be added to the dozen or so conditions I have in the staff report. And I guess the only other question I have for Mr. Liebman is, has the additional filing fee been paid?
Yes, it has.
Okay.
Yes, it has.
Okay. So I would recommend, with all the information in hand at the present time, that the agency issue a permit with 20% of the planting plan cost held for 2 years, and a demarcation feature at the edge of the planted area.
Okay. Good evening,
Thank you, Bob.
everybody. Larry Liebman from SE Minor. Can the demarcation feature be the plantings? Is what I've been asked to ask you guys. As we're taking lawn and taking it out of lawn, the practices that have been utilized there, they're very, very concerned. They don't want to. They don't want to mow the wetlands or anything like that. As far as the architecture and the way that everything falls in, with us tonight is Mr. Daniel Wadia, who's the architect and going to be building all of this, and there's the look of what they were looking for. If a demarcation feature is required, then I just ask that you let us work it through with staff of what would be appropriate and acceptable.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I think in this instance, a demarcation feature is warranted only because it could revert back at some point in the future, based upon what I see here in the planting plans.
Okay.
But I think working that out with staff is appropriate.
Thank you, sir.
Any other agency questions or comments on this application? No? Public questions or comments on what's being proposed? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve with the additional condition articulated by Mr. Clausy and with the demarcation feature to be worked out with staff.
Okay, very good. Is there a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, next up is 2018-139, 94 Pexlin Road, SE Minor and Company, Inc., for 94 Pexlin Road LLC for a subdivision of a property in construction of a residence on the empty lot 84 feet from wetlands. Mr. Clausi, please.
Okay, the director just informs me that Ms. Curlin, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rossi, and Mr. Schoendorf visited this property last week before tonight's meeting. The property currently is a property. It's 5.86 acres, R2 zone, RA2 zone. Applicant proposes to subdivide it. The property line, I believe, runs somewhere in this area with an open space. That's an easement, Mr. Liebman, it's proposed?
The whole thing is in feet.
Okay, all right.
There's enough land that will be put in feet. And the remaining wetland area that's there is going to be regulated by this agency.
Okay, all right, so 2 lots and an open space set aside. The new eastern lot in the upland review area, part of the, I believe, part of the house, a good part of the driveway, some of the drainage structures are within the upland review area of this meadow wetland, and also actually this sort of marshy wetland. The existing, well, the residential use is up here near Pexland Road, and the applicant proposes to take what is an existing service road at the moment and make it a more formal driveway. In doing so, they need to do drainage, detention, and mitigation, which they propose to do with rain gardens in these 2 locations. So the driveway, the drainage structures, this drainage structure and this part of the driveway are within 100 feet of an off-site wetland that comes up right up to the property line in this location. And the septic system over here is also within 100 feet of this marshy wetland. So questions with the application. The driveway. The applicant, or the property is currently serviced by a driveway off of Pexland Road. You know, formalizing this as a driveway this close to the wetland creates all kinds of issues. There's no give and take in the application in the form of mitigation offered. We have no idea whether this whole thing is going to be maintained as a lawn or what. You know, using the existing driveway is a prudent and feasible alternative and a way to avoid all of this activity here. The applicant has not provided a justification for why this is necessary. That off-site wetland should be included on the applicant's plans so that the agency is clear on where that is. If the applicant provides justification for this new driveway, is that the best location for it? Are there curb cuts closer to Pexland Road that would allow for acceptable site distance, which is one consideration, but get it further from the wetland, which is our consideration? Now, regarding the new lot, the applicant has not specified where the limit of landscaping is going to be. There is a erosion control line. Is that the line of landscaping, or is it somewhere else? So this hillside around this wetland is wooded. There are some of that is going to come down when this house is built, if it's built here between the house and the grading. But where is the limit of landscaping here, and where is it back here? Because part of this also extends into this upland review area, this wetland. And question, can this house be shifted to the west? This is all flat up here, and it would get it further from this steep slope down to the meadow wetland. Okay, as I mentioned, any mitigation being offered, and the DPW Engineering Division has reviewed this and has asked for more information and certain revisions before they'll complete their review. So I recommend the agency delay. This is another application where the submission was made with insufficient filing fee, and I don't know whether that's been paid yet. So there are a couple of outstanding issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Go ahead.
Again, we knew that this was going to be delayed, and I'm here on a fact-finding and gathering mission to see if there's anything else so that we can go back. The reason why that existing drive was utilized was driven by architecture. Again, that's not, we understand that, they were trying to get a grand entrance. They are, what is part of the project is that all of the newer items that are a part of this old house and these barn structures are slated to be removed. What the applicant wants to live there, and he wants to make it back to something that's small and historic and so on and so forth without having to go through the historic preservation issues. So I'm here to just take down all notes, and I'm meeting with the architect and the applicant later this week so we can make changes and get it to you back to you with things that are more complete, as well as changes to the DPW comments that they have requested.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. Well, I think Bob was pretty good in his comments in terms of what the main items are, especially this sort of serpentine driveway, which seems kind of crazy to me.
That's your big challenge, obviously.
I understand. But sometimes you have to let the applicants hear it from you guys, even though you say it to them.
Right, right. Any further comments to what Bob's outlined as homework on this?
Well, I do, based on the visit that we made to the site. One comment would be to explore the possibility of relocating the proposed septic tank in order to save some of the trees. And also, while you're at it, to see what you can do to improve the condition of the existing wetlands as a way to mitigate for some of the other things that you're proposing to do.
Thank you.
Additional comments, questions? Public comments or questions on this proposed application? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to delay.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Benton got in there. All in favor? Right. Thank you. Okay, the next two, unless things have changed, 2018-140, 6 Oak Drive, and 2018-141, 20 Walsh Lane, have both requested a delay. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Okay. So we will move on to 2018-142, 46 Meadow Road, Rocco V. DeAndrea, Inc., for Frederick L. Baker III and Mary W. Baker for exterior alterations of a dwelling 7 feet from wetlands. Mr. Clausy, please.
Okay. This lot has a kind of a tough situation with this water course cutting through right there. The house sits up on a knoll. Driveway is also up high, coming right off the road. So, you know, they're trying to keep things tight. They're pushing a little bit closer to the wetland here with this garage bump out and just this little stairwell going in the back of the house. The 308 square foot increase in impervious coverage is to be mitigated by disconnecting roof leaders. Basically, my big concern is this work, which will be done more or less from the driveway. The construction access shown around the west side of the house is merely to get to this stairwell area, which is inaccessible around the east side of the house. The architect says that this is not going to have a full basement under it. It's going to be a frost footing. So getting tight erosion controls, getting down in there, getting that set, getting it up, and getting the slope restabilized will be important. I understand through communication with the applicant's agent that they were considering opportunities to reduce the amount of lawn along the brook in this area. I don't know whether anything's come of that, and if so, a condition of approval should be added that a portion of the performance bond, something on the order of 20%, portion of the, if it's getting rid of lawn, it could be a proportion of the performance bond or percentage of the planting plan be held for 1 year. So Tony's here. I don't know if you have any update on mitigation, Mr. DeAndrea.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Welcome.
Thank you. As of today, there hasn't been a detailed planting plan done for that, but if there's a request for a 5-foot buffer along the stream channel, that could be accommodated. The idea for the garage is at grade, enter just a little bit wider so they can get the 2 cars in. As Bob pointed out, it's a shallow excavation because it's a slab on grade. The access to the back is demonstrated that it can be done. It might need a small Kubota for a few minutes because the floor of the area at the stairwell is basically at grade. So they would just want to come up and hit that grade without excavating it. So we can offer or accept as a condition a landscape strip along the edge of the channel because right now it is grass down to the edge. I think they would be agreeable to that without objection.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. DeAndrea? No? Public questions or comments? Yes, please.
I'm Jim Donovan, and I live right behind 46 Meadow. I'm at 12 Greenbrook Road, and I just have a question about the in the rear where they're going to put the stairs in because, well, our house is 17 feet off the lot line, and the brook meanders behind us and then goes onto their property. There's an existing stairway there now that goes down 4 or 5 feet to the bottom of the basement. And if this new stairway goes down 4 or 5 feet, there's going to have to be some excavation done in that area. And I'm just curious about to what extent that might affect some of the groundwater. We don't have a basement, and we only have a 3-foot crawl space, and we have to have 3 pumps because the water just comes up. So they're so close to us. I'm just concerned a little bit about anything that's going to be disturbed. And there's lawn, essentially, from the back of the house. There's lawn right to their lot line, and to almost where the stream is, I guess, to the stream. So I'd be a little concerned, too, that in addition to putting a buffer along the brook on the east end of the property, where the stairway is going in, if it could be considered for that part of the project as well. So, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Tony, comments?
For clarification, the existing basement elevation is 39.4. They're proposing to come up from that lower level to the elevation of the existing ground, which is around 42.7. Okay. So it's just a couple of risers. We're not excavating to do that, so we're not going to change anything in the way of the water table. I think it becomes a little extensive because there's no activity behind the house because of the steepness of the grade going down to the channel. For those of you who've been there, you can recognize the steepness on that side, and it's only 7.7 feet right now from the northeast corner of the rear of the building to the edge of the wetland as it was delineated, which is right along the edge of the channel. So trying to put another landscape strip over there would not be appropriate, in my opinion. Something in from the street makes sense because it's visual and it's where the driveway is. There's very little activity from that north side of the building, except for safety to get out of the basement. So I'd be opposed to that on their behalf, and there's absolutely no impact on water table elevations as a base of that. This, as you know, comes in around the Hidden Brook area. There's a reason they named it Hidden Brook, and so it's not surprising to know that there's water in the basement on adjacent property.
Yep. Familiar with the area. Okay. Thank you. Any further agency questions? No? Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to approve with the conditions as stated.
Okay, with the, is that with the addition of the 5-foot planting strip?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, lastly, 2018-143, Taconic and South Sandwich Roads. Tata and Howard, Inc., for Aquarian Water Company for Connecticut, for as-of-right determination to replace a water transfer pipeline with clearing and grading within wetlands. Ms. Sesto, please.
Okay, so unlike the application that the agency reviewed just earlier this evening, which was not as-of-right activities, this project does qualify under Section 4 as an as-of-right in transferring the impounded water from one reservoir down to another that falls within the Section 4. So much of what we're going to speak about tonight is as-of-right activities, but then there's an element where, so the concept of the project is as-of-right. How the project is implemented, as I've stated in the staff report, the agency should have the opportunity to question if all that is being proposed in association with the construction is necessary for this water line, and elements that are not necessary would not be as of right in short order. So to understand the project, it calls for a uniform minimum clearing of a 30, well, I should back up a minute. So you've got the barge up here, and then it's in Stanford, comes across Farms Road, and this is too small, so I'm not going to actually point to the right places.
Can we zoom in on that, Doreen, please?
But in effect, it's going to come across Farms Road and then to Taconic, south on Taconic, and then come across and enter into wooded property of Aquarian. Right now, the water main falls, oddly, on lots of private properties going through backyards and the like. So gotta love a long history of New England. So they're going to rectify that issue and put it actually in the road, which I can see makes obvious sense for a lot of reasons. Once it leaves Taconic, as I said, it enters undeveloped land owned by Aquarian. It is a large wetland system, a very wet wetland. There are steeper slopes off the side of Taconic, and that's where the system first comes in. Matt, you're pointing? Thank you. Oh, that's, okay. So it runs parallel-ish along Taconic before turning to the west and wrapping around the south side of the wetland and then discharging to the watercourse, which feeds Rockwood Lake. Do I have that name right? Thank you. I get lost in names of these things. So this, as I said, it goes through principally a wooded area once it leaves Taconic. There's some tangly scrub up in the beginning area, then you break out of that into standard woodlands associated with those slopes. There's intermittent water courses that take road drainage down to the wetland area. Some have some erosion issues, some do not, but clearly it's an amount of water that has to be dealt with, and the plans do call for culverts to pass under the water line. Once the water line is installed, it's going to be maintained as an access road for various maintenance needs over the course of its life. In constructing this 12-foot wide access road, the plans and narrative call for a uniform clearing of a 30-foot wide swath to accommodate this road. There was no discussion of what drives that uniform configuration, whether it be stockpiling, machine, don't know. So I believe that that is an important thing for the agency to pursue, the reasoning behind that. And consistent with the report by Environmental Land Solutions, retention of mature trees was stated as a goal, but again, the Tate and Howard documentation doesn't complement that ELS goal. So with regards to that uniform 30-foot clearing, if the applicant cannot substantiate why that is necessary, those elements arguably could be inconsistent with Section 4.2E. Grading from Station 5900 to 6300 pushes the footprint of disturbance out to a width of up to 50 feet. This is the portion of the project where the access road and water line are running parallel with the slope. So you do have some side cutting and filling that's necessary to get a flat road in there. Where there are opportunities to use other grading of the side slopes, armoring those, gabions, retaining boulders, whatnot to help reduce that footprint of disturbance. The ELS report states there are several measures to reduce the impacts and restore what impacts could not be avoided. Several instances these contradict information presented in the Tate and Howard narrative and map notes. A unified proposal should be presented to ensure the agency's expectations of the project are accurate. One recommendation of ELS is to replant alongside the access road with spice bush. While spice bush is a perfectly suitable wetland plant, it does not compensate for the breaks in the canopy that are going to result from the clearing. The spice bush should be robustly supplemented with canopy trees to close up the breaks in the long run. With the extent of invasives within the area, a plan to close the canopy is warranted to protect the integrity of the wetland. Dewatering of the pipe trench will be necessary. There are no meaningful discussions with regards to this, only one detail of a settling basin on the detail sheet. So the applicant needs to be more explicit regarding the construction methodology. How many days will it take to build the road? What are the logistics associated with the task? How many days will it be to install the pipeline, dewatering basins, and information to the like. There's no accommodation for stockpiling of either soil or the pipeline that's going to be necessary. The Tate and Howard report articulates reasoning to support the preferred route while reconstructing the pipe in its current location, which is straight across, thank you, this really hardy wetland. That is a shorter route, but I do concur with the reasoning that in the long run it would be more detrimental to the wetland to try to get through there. Just dealing with the mucky soils and stabilization of equipment, that would have resulted in some pretty good damage to the wetland, as well as any future necessities to access the line for maintenance or repairs. So while it is shorter, I think it does have a higher level of direct wetland impact. So I do concur with Tate and Howard. So the proposed project certainly conceptually qualifies for a declaratory ruling. I think the opportunity is to work out some of the details to make sure that this is the minimal amount of impact would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Pop, landscape architect, professional wetland scientist. I'm with you in Sal Longo, a project engineer. And we just got the staff report this evening, so we did read through it. And there's some things we could definitely address coming back. But just to point out a few items, as you know, Pat noted, Stanford line is right through here, Barge Reservoir is up here. In Stanford, actually, the pipeline, which is going to be increased from, I think, a 20-inch to a 24-inch, actually goes underneath the swimming pool, part of someone's house. When it gets into Greenwich, there's a large wetland here that the existing main cuts across through here. This project avoids disturbing that wetland. So we're getting, pipe goes from here, goes out to Conic Road. Pat noted there's a wetland here. That it's a wooded wetland that we're avoiding a disturbance of that, and we're bringing a new pipe location down the hillside. As Pat noted, crosses a couple of intermittent water courses. There's some erosion issues from drainage from that's discharged from Taconic Road. And then in this area right here, right here, the portion of the wetland is impacted. It would be filled through here. And then the pipeline follows an old wood road that discharges in the water course that discharges into Rockwood Reservoir. I think that these items, the 5 or 6 items that Pat noted in the staff report could be addressed, and we took them. And right now, I think we're just here if there's any additional comments from the agency. So.
I should note the agency members that were, the 4 that were listed previously also were to this site.
Okay.
And kudos to them, because it wasn't easy.
Hopefully you came in from the Conic Road side, not the other side.
Yes, we did.
Very good. Any further agency questions on this? Yep.
Is the, Matt, is the existing pipeline going to be just left in place?
Yes, and
just abandoned.
right, it's
Yeah,
it's
abandoned.
going to be abandoned in place. Yes.
Is there any possible repercussions of that? I mean, it's one thing to have a pipeline that's filled and in use, another one that's just old and rusting and
I think parts of it's going to be blocked.
The parts, yeah, part underneath the swimming pool, Mr. DeRuder's property will be filled.
That's in Stanford.
That's in Stanford, but the rest of it is either through woods or through wetlands, and it shouldn't, it's, cast iron, it shouldn't have to collapse on it.
it leaks, but it doesn't collapse. Okay.
Very good.
The leak is mostly through the joints.
Okay.
In some locations, the exact location of the pipe is unknown. That's the other issue.
No surprise there.
Right.
Is the existing pipeline, will water infiltrate into it if it has leaks? When it's filled, will water infiltrate once it's empty?
It can, but the pressure is not as high as when you're pumping.
No, I understand that. I'm just wondering whether it wouldn't have a tendency to first have water infiltrate and tend to dry out the wetlands that it's
Yeah, you don't
passing
want it
for
to
just a little bit.
Or wetland, that's, but we could put in, where we can get to the access, I mean, the existing pipe, we could, definitely block those sections, so.
I don't think you'd want water infiltrating and then draining down through the
No,
existing
yeah.
into the
Yeah, and
water
I
supply.
understand your point, like in this wetland here, the
Raw
pressure is
water.
actually lower here, we
It would
don't
be
want to
really raw.
drain that wetland system.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
So you're saying you're going to block the abandoned pipe?
Block the abandoned pipe, yes. We're in the process of going through the Stanford Environmental Protection Board. Probably submit an application there in the next month or 2.
Okay.
Tentatively, when's this work going to get done?
Hopefully starting either the
spring or fall next year, depending on getting easements and getting approval, permits.
There's some issues in Stanford too, if they're gonna replace an existing road culvert, or road bridge right here. If the pipe's gonna go around there, or if it's gonna get replaced. We're working with the city engineer on that.
So there's no issue of residents accessing this pipe? They're all going to stay on their wells or whatever?
It's a raw water main, so
Right.
you can't serve anything.
Right. No connection issues.
Further agency questions? Any public questions or comments on this? Yes, please.
My name is Frank Parker. I live at 276 Taconic Road, and actually the old pipe crosses my land. I've been living there for 40 years, so I pretty much know the area. And I have some concerns, which have already been raised, about a 30-foot wide cutting of the woodlands. I just took some pictures of a 30-foot wide opening of the gas line that I would like to share with you all. Question the need for 30-foot wide, and then secondly, hopefully it's not going to be maintained as the gas company maintains this right away through Greenwich and Stanford. But furthermore, and not to be adversarial, I think there may be a better path of crossing private property, as was done and similarly 2 summers ago with the plastic pipe through the Molinari property. It is private property, and I know that the water company is trying to stay off private property, but they are crossing private property in Stanford, as you've already heard. And with the landowner's permission, I think this crossing of her property, it's the Molinari property, would save megabucks, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would save perhaps 1,000 feet of pipe, and it would intersect the stream where the existing pipe intersects and perfectly satisfy the engineering needs of this new pipe. I don't know if the water company has thoroughly explored this, but I think it's a much less impact and lower cost alternative to what's been proposed. Thank you.
Can you roughly show us where that alternative would be?
This is the corner of North Stanwich Road and Taconic Road. Mrs. Molinari lives right about here, and I live right over here. And the pipe that was put in 2 summers ago crossed her land and intersected the stream somewhere around here that continues to service the existing pipe. So it would eliminate excavating 600 feet of road, and it would eliminate it would be able to intersect the stream way north here instead of way down here. It's the same stream going connecting from here to here, roughly. I don't see her property boundaries. I'm not really sure of the exact lines. I do know this is a very large wetland here, and I know that Greenwich Land Trust has a piece of land here somewhere, and Mrs. Molinari's property is probably 4 or 5 acres right around here.
Okay. Has Mrs. Molinari opined on this proposal?
I know her well. She had granted permission for the plastic pipe 2 summers ago. I have not raised this to her. I don't know if the water company has already talked to her. I don't know if the water company would consider this path, but I'd be happy to interface with her. And certainly she'd be deserving of some significant compensation. But net, I'm sure this pipe would be a lot less expensive and again, a lot less environmentally damaging. And then I hope it doesn't remain like that picture forever.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Pop?
I'm not sure of that, what that pipe was. It might have been the pipe that Aquarion placed above ground during the drought 2 years ago. So I don't think there was a pipe installed in the ground in that location. I could be wrong, but above ground.
Yeah, so this, again, that was a temporary access pipe. I think you might have seen them on the Mirror Parkway, but they used it here to bring water from the barge down to Rockwood, so that was just a temporary.
But why wouldn't it be an adequate alternative?
Because, we would need easements across those properties.
Obviously.
Yeah, it would be
But I
underground.
mean, based on the path he just, very informally demonstrated, it looks like it's worth consideration.
No, we could look into it, yes.
Okay. Very good.
Matt, and I'm sure why not just go, well, I should ask two questions. One, does the stream that you're discharging into cross North Stanwich Road? Cross under North Stanwich? Yeah.
No.
No, okay. But that answers why you didn't go down North Stanwich.
I think we would have to go up and then
Up
go
North
down,
Stanwich, well.
and then down. So,
Always dig a hole deeper.
Okay.
If I could just
Thank you.
add,
Sure.
my name is Stephen Bishop. I live at 265 Taconic Road, right across the street from Mr. Barker. And I agree with him that it would save a lot. I mean, it would be much shorter, much shorter. And obviously, you'd have to pay compensation or make a deal, and it would all be dependent upon that. But it would save hundreds of feet of cutting roads and everything. My only other concern is if it does go ahead where it is, I live right where it juts off Taconic Road into the woods, and I have some beautiful trees, a 100-year-old oak tree right there, and I would just ask that they try to protect it, and because once they start digging next to a big 100-year oak tree, you're going to kill it. But hopefully they can angle enough so that you don't disturb it, if you do go that way. I don't know if you know what I mean. Okay.
Okay, great.
But I think the other option is worth exploring, if nothing else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Further, yes, Mr. Janet.
Could I just ask, what's the magic about the 30-foot clearing? Why is it 30 foot, not 25 feet or something? The road itself is 12 feet, you said, right?
Correct. We've spoken with a lot of contractors. It's a big 24-inch main. It's going to be a big excavator, and they feel that they need that room to boom around, pick up the pipe or pick up material and put it back down into the trench.
But that's just during construction.
Correct.
But then the clearing is going to be permanent.
Well, yes, our plan was to seed it, but the road is the main thing that we need, the access road for the long run.
Right, so it can be replanted.
But the road is, you said the access road is 12
It's gonna be
feet.
yeah.
12 feet.
Over the pipe.
Well, are you going to be putting canopy trees back in
We'll address that.
to replace?
That's part of what
We'll
Pat's
address
asking for.
Pat's
Yeah.
concerns.
Right.
Okay.
So the swing of the excavator, since I don't think it's going around in circles, and the access road is, and the pipeline is centered in that 30 feet, there's something about that explanation that needs further explanation.
Okay.
You're going to be turning around, dump trucks.
Brendan Fimian, Aquarium Water Company. If you're going to have to turn around a dump truck, if you're stuck, 800, 900 feet pulled in straight on the access road, then you're going to have to go in reverse. So it's kind of just for safety, worker safety, really. You don't want them to go off the end of a ravine turning around or anything, so.
Yeah, I think the 30 feet can be refined, it just doesn't need to be uniform.
It just seems like an awful lot of wide area that you would need for just for the construction. I mean, I've seen a lot of Caterpillar equipment that can maneuver pretty well in much narrower area. But, okay.
Again, that was one of Pat's comments that we'll address.
Right. Thank you. Any other public questions, comments on this?
I have a procedural comment for Pat, or a question, really. Even though this is an as-of-right activity, can we still require prudent and feasible alternatives?
I would like to check with legal on that, but to the extent that the language in 4.2, construction and operation by water companies, they meet the definition. Dams, reservoirs, and other facility necessary for the impounding, storage, and withdrawal of water. So it's that necessary component, which I think that I would seek clarification from legal on. I think I can totally concur that this pipeline is necessary, but does that entitle them to any configuration of the pipeline? So I don't honestly know where necessary and feasible and prudent overlap each other. So I can get a better answer for you.
What section of the regulations are you in?
It's 4.2E, page 11.
4.2B or not 2B?
Is the kind to necessity. Probably not mutually exclusive.
Well, it would seem that, alternative, whether it's feasible or not, has been presented by the members of the public as something that is probably warrants investigation, if that indeed is something. I would imagine it's in Aquarion's best financial interest, and the people that pay water bills to keep those costs as minimal as possible. And if there is an alternative out there that also has less of a potential impact to a wetland, then it should be investigated.
Well, it also makes sense whether it's mutually exclusive alternative, it's not necessary. If there's an alternative, then arguably it's not necessary there, which would fall within the as-of-right criteria.
Your question is still valid.
Okay. So I'll make Pat, you're looking for a determination as of right, or you're looking for an approval of the plan and?
Eventually the agency would be, I think it's the intent of Aquarian to bring the entire project into the point where it is all considered necessary and the agency makes the declaratory ruling that 4.2E applies.
Okay. Then I will make a motion to delay. We have additional information that we need to act upon, and I think in the next month, if you can investigate this alternative that's been put forward by the public and give us your opinion on that, that would be helpful in terms of our understanding of the project. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
All right.
All right, okay, thank you. Applications to be received. I will make a motion to receive applications 1 through 15 on tonight's agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right. Okay, finally, not finally, but agent approval permits. There are 3, 2018-132, 14 Carissa Lane, 2018-145, 25 Tremont Street, and 2018-148, 12 Knollwood Drive. Are there any agency or public questions or comments on the agent-approved permits? No? Okay. Moving on then to violations. We have 2 tonight. Cease and correct order 2018-14 for Laura and Brian Markovich, 11 Druid Lane, unauthorized removal of vegetation and manipulation of a wetland. Doreen, please.
They asked for this one to be delayed to the December 17th meeting.
Okay. So do you need a motion then to maintain the cease and correct?
I
I don't
think
think we need to do anything.
Okay, very good.
their representative is out of the state, and he'd like to be here to represent them.
Okay. Next is cease and correct order 2018-15 for JP Greenwich Holdings LLC, 69 Carolyn Place, unauthorized fill adjacent to wetlands and watercourses. Doreen, please.
Okay, record of documents for 67 Caroline Place. Photos dated November 13th, 2018. The 2008 GIS map. Violation summary and cease and correct order 2018-15 issued November 19th, 2018. So staff was alerted by a neighbor that fill material was being stockpiled at 67 Caroline Place along the slope leading down to the Byram River. On site, staff did observe multiple piles of dirt. There were no erosion controls installed. Staff spoke with the homeowner, Eric Salinas, by phone on site. He later came into the office to further discuss the violation and to pick up the application materials. He seemed amenable to correcting the issue. Cease and correct order 2018-15 was sent to the property owner on November 19th, 2018. Staff recommends the agency maintain the cease and correct order and further recommends a certificate of violation on the land record if the application isn't received by January 8th, 2019.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. Is there anyone from the violator here? No? Okay. Motion to maintain cease and correct order 2018-15. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Okay, moving on to other business, I think we can just jump to B. This is appeal of approval by a duly authorized agent of deposition of additional fill in the upland review area without modification to existing IWWA permit 2015-36 of Brian and Nisha Hurst for construction of a single-family residence, driveway, in-ground pool, cabana, tennis court, septic system, and drainage system at 489 North Street.
Okay, if the agency will allow me to orient you to the materials that were sent out with your packet, and I have a copy for Mr. Fulton, and I have a copy for Mr. Cohen.
Okay.
I also would like to pass down this, which is the section of our regulations that talks about agent approvals. All right. Looking at this November 21st memo that covered the materials I sent out in your packets, this is background information regarding this item on tonight's agenda. The first item, labeled number 1, is the legal notice that was published in the Greenwich Time on October 5th, 2018, talking about the authorization for deposition of additional fill in the upland review area without modification to this existing IWWA permit 2015-36. Second item is a copy of the appeal of decision filed by James Fulton Esquire on behalf of Amr Zahid. This is dated October 19th, 2018, and it also includes Exhibit A, which was attached to the appeal. Third item is a copy of the proposed grading exhibit prepared by Redness and Mead Incorporated. This is dated September 5th, 2017. On this plan, there's a Greenwich IWWA stamp post-approval map number, and this references the application number 2015-015, which is related to permit 2015-36. On this stamp, the note was made, no modification required for additional grading of backyard. That grading is shown in red on the plan. This stamp is dated September 8th, 2017. The fourth item is this item 3 enlarged to the scale of 1 inch equals 30, that should be 30 feet, not 30 inches. 1 inch equals 30 foot scale, which is the same scale that all of the permit plans were in. On this copy, the wetland and limit of the 100-foot upland review area have been highlighted. The wetland is highlighted in blue. The upland review area is a yellow line with a label. And the red grading lines, proposed grading lines, are shown. Underneath those proposed grading lines, there are dark black grading lines with square numbers. Those are the approved grading that was approved in permit 2015-36 by this agency. Also on this enlargement is indicated the approved erosion control line, which is along the edge of the open space easement. The approved buffer demarcation fence along the edge of the open space easement, which is to the west of the wetland into the upland review area. And also shown is a cross-section A prime, which I'll discuss in a second, basically right now. Number 5 is a portion of the site utility sheet from the permit 2015-36 plan set. This shows section A prime, which goes through the approved septic leaching fields. And you'll note that the same proposed grading lines shown on the other 2 plans are shown here with the proposed grading in boxes. Finally, this was also included in the permit plan set, cross-section A prime cross-section, in which the approved grading over the septic fields and to the edge of the what they call the 60-foot IWWA setback to septic is okay. This is shown in black. The proposed grading that was approved on September 8th, 2017 is shown in pink. And also highlighted here is that yellow 100-foot upland review area line, which does go, the grading does go, the additional grading does go into the upland review area. But as you see, it very quickly joins the previously approved grading over the septic leaching fields. So Mr. Fulton is here appealing the decision of the authorized agent who made this determination, and I will admit that that authorized agent was me. I've been an authorized agent since November 2002, and I make these decisions as all of the professional staff in the agency do on a regular basis. As shown in the, let's see, the part of what we do when we get a request like this to make a field change to an approved plan is we look at the permit. And on the permit, which is part of Exhibit A, Special Condition 8, it says, no grading, clearing, landscaping, or other ground disturbance shall occur within 50 feet of inland wetland and watercourse areas except as reviewed and approved by agency staff. So the permit itself authorized staff to approve grading changes within 50 feet, and the grading changes that were approved here are not within 50 feet. They're further than 50 feet. So Mr. Fulton is here to make his appeal, and I'd be interested to hear what he has to say.
Okay. Hi, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the agency. My name is James Fulton, and I represent Mr. and Mrs. Amr Zahid, who live at 487 North Street. The first thing that I have to do tonight is apologize to you for what I'm about to hand out. I was under the impressions that there would be 2 alternates here tonight, not 3. And so I'm short 1 copy, and if I may impose upon Mr. Rossi and Mr. Jander to perhaps look on with each other, I'd be very grateful. Secondly, I would like to say that I've had a couple of interactions with Mr. Clausy in October, and he has treated me with courtesy and with cordiality. That's not easy to do when someone's challenging something that you did, but it is not unexpected from the finest of public servants, which is something that I have to credit Mr. Clausy for. Now, with me tonight is my partner, Mr. James Riley, who's going to help me hand out some things. Everyone from Mr. Rogers over. The first thing that I've asked Mr. Riley to hand you is just a small map which shows the relationship of the Hearst and the Zahid properties. The property line is the dark black line. The Hearst property is located to the immediate west of the Zahid property. The Zahid property is number 487 North Street, and the Hearst property is number 489 North Street. And I've marked in yellow where the wetlands are, and of course the upland review area is within 100 feet of those wetlands. The next thing I've prepared is a brief exhibit that asks, why are we here tonight and how did we get here? Well, in 2015, Mrs. Hearst needed to conduct regulated activities on this property as part of a project involving the construction of a new 15,000 square foot home. So she filed a long form application with this agency. She was heard by you, and she was granted a permit to build her home and to deposit 558 cubic yards of fill into upland review areas on the site in 2015. 2 years later, she decided she wanted to deposit an additional 2,300 additional cubic yards of fill on her property, including 300 additional cubic yards or 30 truckloads of fill in the upland review area. Mrs. Hurst thought she didn't have to file a long-form application for this, and there is no doubt Section 12 of your regulations provides a shortcut procedure where a request can be reviewed and approved by a duly authorized agent of the agency. But unfortunately, she and her representatives ignored all of the procedural safeguards in your regulations designed to protect the public and to give interested parties an opportunity to submit their own evidence germane to her request that she be allowed to dump 30 more truckloads of fill into the upland review area. She made a request to deposit more fill, but she did not file her request on the form required by Section 12 of the regulations. She did not provide notice to abutters of her request as required by Sections 12 and 7.9H of the regulations. She submitted none of the 5 certifications required by Section 12 and 7.6 of the regulations that are designed to protect the public. She submitted none of the written descriptions, explanations, or statements required by Sections 12 and 7.7 of the regulations to educate the public. She submitted none of the maps, soil scientist certifications, photos, reports, and other materials required by Sections 12 and 7.9 of the regulations designed further to inform the public when you are asking permission to do something of a duly authorized agent. In lieu of obeying the requirements of the regulations for approval by a duly authorized agent, Mrs. Hurst instead had one of her representatives pay a personal visit to Robert Clousey at his office on September 8th of 2017 with a single 11.5-inch piece of paper in his hand entitled Grading Exhibit, which you may have, but here's another one. So instead of filing a request under Section 12 and all of the accompanying materials that are required by Section 12, Mr. McMahon simply shows up in Mr. Clousey's office with this piece of paper in his hand and says, my client would like to dump 30 more truckloads of fill into the upland review area. Would you please...
Excuse me for just a second. You were in the room, so you know what he said?
No, I was not in the room.
Okay, so you don't know what he said?
No, but I have spoken to Mr. Clousey about it, who said that he was visited by Mr.
Right, but I just want to be clear, because you're representing a specific conversation.
Okay, you're right. I am presuming that Mr. McMahon asked Mr. Clousey if it would be okay if his client dumped another 30 truckloads of fill into the upland review area.
No.
Well,
he showed me a plan that indicated additional fill would be put there. The quantity was frankly immaterial. It was where the fill was going to be placed.
Okay. Well, I want you to know that our engineers at Rizzoli Engineering have calculated from the elevations that are on that exhibit the fact that, in fact, 300 additional cubic yards of fill were deposited into the upland review area.
I just want to be clear. You keep characterizing it as a deposit of fill. This was a grading, correct? The fill was there to grade the land.
No. She brought an additional 2,300 cubic yards of imported fill and put 300 of them in the upland review area.
For grading purposes.
Well, it was represented
What
to us by
what was
Mr.
the
Cohen.
point of putting the fill in the upland review area?
I'm told by Mr. Cohen that the Hearsts wanted a flat backyard for their children to play on in lieu of a gradually sloping backyard. So they needed 2,300 more cubic yards of fill to build a flat mesa, which they did.
So I'm correct, this is, the characterization of just depositing the fill is incomplete. It was depositing the fill for the purposes of a grading exercise, correct?
It was depositing the fill for the purpose of changing the elevations in the backyard.
Okay.
And, but this I do believe is factual. Before he left Mr. Clause's office on September 8th of 2017, Mr. Clause had signed off on the piece of paper there that you see, approving the deposition of what turned out to be 300 additional cubic yards of fill in the upland review area. And a month later, 2,300 cubic yards of fill were trucked into the Hearst property, and 300 of them were deposited in the upland review area.
So can you outline what the adverse impact to the wetland was for this additional fill that was placed
At the
here?
moment, I don't know.
Okay.
Then what are you- I'm sorry.
I've not had an opportunity to review a properly filed request with all of the various attachments that must be included.
But you must have,
You filed a suit, though, in Superior Court on it?
Yes, we did.
And what was the premise of that suit? Procedural defects?
Yes, and in fact,
So
Mr. Chairman.
There's nothing on the merits or the substance of the level of impact?
Not as of yet.
okay.
We do have some distinguished soil scientists that are studying the matter
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay, so how do we get here if you've already filed in the Superior Court?
Look, good question, Mr. Skoufalos. And a good question by you too, Mr. Chairman, because I want to make this simple. I'm here tonight just arguing procedure. I'm not going to talk about harm to wetlands this evening. I'm just going to talk about law. And anyway, as Mr. Skoufalos has correctly pointed out, this behavior compelled the Zahids, whose wetlands abut the upland review area, to institute suit in the Superior Court against Hearst, against the IWWA, and against the town, simply to have Mr. Clause's September 8th, 2017 approval declared invalid because Section 12 of your regulations, in our opinion, was not complied with, and notice was given to no one. No one was given an opportunity to submit any evidence whatsoever. Yes, Mr.
Excuse me. What prompted the Zahids to contact you to initiate suit? They would have had no understanding, as you've presented, as to any procedural defects. What prompted them to this action?
Well, the Zahids have been our clients for a very long time.
Same question. What prompted them?
I can't waive the attorney-client privilege, so I can't answer that question, Mr. Galvin.
All right, but we could assume, probably incorrectly, that they perceived some degradation to their wetland because of this added fill on their neighbor's property?
They're starting to learn more and more about that every day. Their knowledge was less then than it is today, and their knowledge of that point will be even greater tomorrow.
Can we get now to why we're here today? Because I want to ask you a few questions about Section 12.
Absolutely.
How is this appeal ripe for this agency, given what's transpired in court?
Because, Mr. Skoufalos, tonight, all we are appealing is what Mr. Clausy did on September 27th of 2018. And here is what he did, Jim.
September 27th as opposed to September 8th, right?
Correct. September 8th of 2017, he signed off on the grading exhibit.
And that's what you challenged in court, correct? And what is the status of that suit now?
It's in its early stages at the moment.
Okay, so
Yes, there is a pending.
We already have.
So there's been an amendment, an amendment of the, what do we, let's call it the right thing here, of the duly authorized agent's action in 2018, correct?
Well, call it what you will. There has been an approval, and if you take a look at it, Mr. Skoufalos, you will see that Mr. Clausy recites that he is exercising his powers under Section 12 of your regulations, and he is issuing, pursuant to that section, this more elaborate approval.
And this approval differs from the one in 17?
It's the same thing. Well, it differs in so much as he's approving something that was already completed 12 months earlier. But in fact,
I'm just trying to understand one thing procedurally. So in lieu of going to court on this 2018 approval, you're before us to appeal it here. Is that correct? Okay.
correct.
And why are you here on this approval as opposed to the first approval? Did you appeal the first approval before this agency?
No, because there was nothing published in the newspaper. None of the procedural safeguards were followed in 2017.
Did you object to the original application for the construction of the house?
No. In the 2015 application, my clients had no objection to.
Okay, so let's go.
Okay. So this is why we're here tonight, for what is in front of you at the moment, this approval dated September 27th of 2018. Now, I'd like to make 2 points, if I may, Jim, as to why this approval, I'm asking you tonight to declare this approval to be null and void. And the first point that I'd like to make is a very important public policy point that should be kept in mind with regard to all of your activities and all of your applications. Neither Mr. Clausy nor this agency had jurisdiction on September 27, 2018, to grant approval to activities that were completed in 2017. Your regulations do not provide for after-the-fact approvals. The courts provide rather clearly that Mr. Clausy, as a duly authorized agent, may only do acts that the agency could itself do. And no greater powers are conferred to the agent than those held by the principal, which is you. You are the principal, he is your duly authorized agent. This agency only has power to review and approve proposed activities. No regulation gives you or your agent authority to grant approval to an activity that has already taken place a year earlier. And if you look through your regulations, you see that it's clear over and over and over again. No person shall conduct a regulated activity without first obtaining a permit. Any person intending to conduct a regulated activity shall, prior to the commencement of activity, apply for a permit. All applicants shall certify any portion of the property on which the regulated activity is proposed. Traffic attributable to the completed project on the site will use streets. Sewer or water drainage from the site will flow. Water runoff from the improved site will impact streets. Section 7.7, you have to submit a brief description of the proposed regulated activity, not what you did a year ago. And 7.9, over and over, the information that has to be submitted with the application, and mind you, also has to be submitted with a request under Section 12 to a duly authorized agent. A request under Section 12 has to comply with 7.6, 7.7, 7.8, and 7.9, and that's right in Section 12.1. So you have to file all of these things with that request. And they had to give a description of existing site conditions and a description of the proposed activity. A site plan accurately depicting proposed conditions. A location map showing the location which is the subject of the proposed activity. Over and over and over again. Your regulations only give you the power to entertain applications and requests under Section 12, if you're Mr. Clausy, for proposed activities, not activities done a year ago.
Well, but how does that address violations and corrections to violations? Those are activities that had been done without authorization that we then
You have a right to issue a violation and have it heard here. But what you don't have a right to do is what's on the bottom of page 5 of my handout. There is a compelling public policy reasons why your regulations are written the way they are, to give you authority to review and approve proposed activity. If an agency were given authority to render after-the-fact approvals, people would be incentivized to seek no approvals and do things in secret. That's what you do not want. If they got caught, they could come forward and say, oops, you caught me. But would you please just approve what I did illegally, and will you do it now? Your regulations do not provide for that.
Just curious, I believe as a general rule, we allow field changes. And the field changes don't require a complete application. That the agency staff can look at a proposed field change and approve it and say this fits within the context of an issued permit. And I'm confused as to why what we're looking at here doesn't fall under that particular element of our process.
Probably for two reasons, Mr. Benton. Number one is a decision to dump 30 truckloads of new fill into an upland review area is more than just a field change, in my estimation.
That's your estimation, but without knowing the complete extent of the upland review area, this is a 5-acre property?
4.6, yes.
Okay, so that's roughly 25,000 square feet, something on that order, if I'm not mistaken? More?
Yeah, but
30,000 square feet?
that may be.
So 300 cubic feet within the context of 25,000 square feet. I'm not sure what that means.
Okay.
And I'm really, really, really confused as to why you're here and why this has even come up, without knowing that there is any sort of an impact on the wetlands.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Benton. But I'm here to argue process and procedure.
But you've gone to court.
By the way, the second half.
You've gone to court to
May
argue
I-
process and procedure.
You're arguing substance. And can I just ask, I'm sorry if I'm interfering, but can I ask, is the case, you brought a case, or the Hearst brought a case in Superior Court suing this agency and the town and Mr. Clausy, is that correct? Is that case still pending?
It is. Now, let me.
Now, may I finish?
Yes.
Now, if this case is still pending, why have we not been taken out of this thing and the jurisdiction has been taken away, and you should bring your procedural and your substantive issues forward in that pending case? We are precluded, it seems to me, at the moment, you having chosen to go and bring a case in Superior Court, we have no current jurisdiction.
Let me
You should bring it before the case that you've got pending.
But there's one fact that you don't know, Mr. Jander, and it's a very
Sure,
astute.
that's not the only one.
No, it's a very astute question, and a good segue into my explanation here. The reason these lawyers for the Hearsts put together that approval document and submitted it to Mr. Clausy to approve and to sign is because they thought and they think that they could deny us our rights to pursue that lawsuit if they did this.
That is a question pending for decision before the current court case that you've got pending. That's where you should be making that argument.
But, Mr. Jander, there is a doctrine in the law that says when there is an administrative remedy available, an aggrieved party must pursue the administrative remedy before going to court.
And you didn't. You didn't. You went to court, and you did not pursue that administrative remedy.
There was none then.
Why not?
Because they didn't publish in the newspaper the decision that Mr. Clausy had rendered on September 8th of 2017.
And how did you know to file a lawsuit?
Have you now withdrawn your case before the court?
No.
Oh, no.
Well, then
relief
I
are you seeking?
don't see how we have any substantive or jurisdictional or procedural jurisdiction at the moment to go forward with this. You should bring all these arguments. If they are meritorious, you should bring them before the court and the case you have pending.
If I may, Mr. Jander, the court case challenges the September 8th, 2017 approval.
So does this. What you've been arguing so far, you're challenging that also.
Tonight, we are challenging the September 27th, 2018 approval.
May I ask a question about that very point, because I think that gets to the heart of this procedural conundrum we face here. Isn't it correct that that 2018 approval isn't a separate approval? It's a modification of the 2017 approval, albeit more explanatory, more elaborate in its rationale, But at the end of the day, we have one approval, and that approval took place in 2017. You have a modified written amendment, I'll call it, I'll let the rules speak to what we should properly call it. So in effect, we are dealing with the same rule, the same approval, and you did exercise your right to go to Superior Court to challenge that without coming to this agency, and you may have a rationale for doing that. So my concern is if we step in now and start evaluating an appeal of a second approval, we're not speaking apples to apples, because it's really the first approval we're looking at, and there may be an explanation. I certainly want to hear it from Mr. Clossy and for the Hearst lawyer if he's here, but there may be an explanation for why we get to this modification. But I still think your biggest issue in terms of ripeness and standing here, and just to elaborate a little bit on what Mr. Jander said, is that we're still talking about the same initial approval.
Mr. Skoufalos, on October 5th of 2018, the Hearsts, unlike 2017, did publish in the newspaper the decision, the fact that Mr. Clousy had granted the approval on September 27 of 2018. And Mr. Fogarty, Mr. Cohen's partner, graciously brought that to our attention. Had I not filed this appeal, Mr. Fogarty would say, well, you've waived your administrative remedies, Jim. You might have a point with respect to what happened in 2017. But in 2018, we did publish, and we let you know. So in order for you to preserve your rights, you have got to file an appeal to the Inland Wetland Agency, or you're out in the street. So that's why we did what we did.
All right, that makes...
Why aren't you, you're trying to split a cause of action. Why isn't this a pendant issue to be brought before the case you've got pending? We are
because
excluded
of the
at
rule
this
of
point.
law that says that if there is an administrative remedy available to me, I must exhaust it before going to court.
I think that's at least an articulated position. However, let's hear some other points of view with regard to its application to this particular circumstance. So,
if I could butt in, we have 3 attorneys on this board, and I'm not one of them, so you're hearing from them. But it's Section 12.2 of our regulations say, the agency shall at its discretion sustain, alter, or reject the decision of the agent, or require an application for a permit in accordance with Section 7 of these regulations. Now, in order to do that, we would need some indication from you that there is an impact to the wetlands. We can only make a decision based on impacts to the wetlands. I don't care about the administrative aspects of this. If you are not here tonight to indicate that the agent has made a technical error and that there is a direct impact to the wetlands by his action, I cannot sustain your appeal.
Well, Mr. Benton, I respect your opinion.
Is there an impact to the wetlands?
I don't believe you have the power under any circumstances to, if I were here with all sorts of argument, but not asking for a cease and desist order. The fact is, what was done was completed a year ago. Your regulations don't give you jurisdiction to entertain applications for things that were done a year ago.
no, I have to disagree with that characterization. I don't think this approval is retrospective. I think this approval is a modification of something that was done timely. That's what I think. So I don't accept that as
Well,
as an argument.
that's going to, the court will tell us whether they accept it as an argument. Well,
but what else do you want us to hear? Because I'd like to hear from Ms. Sesto, I'd like to hear from, I'd like some context to what we're talking about now.
Pages here. Could you just, in simple, non-lawyer terms, state what you expect in a perfect world this evening to hear from this agency on this matter? In other words, are you asking us to make an administrative judgment on this matter, or are you, in Mr. Benton's terms, asking us to comment on an impact to a watercourse or a wetland?
the former, I am asking you tonight.
Do you consider that to be in our jurisdiction?
Yes. I am asking you to interpret your own rules and regulations and to declare Mr. Clause's September 27th, 2018 approval, which is in front of you, null and void. And I'm asking you to do that for two reasons. Reason number one is because he had no power to render an approval for something that was completed a year ago. And reason number two is in front of you right now.
Going back to reason number one, is it theoretically possible, in using your rationale, that we might find the September 2018 modification, I'll call it, perhaps defective procedurally, but that the first approval is still valid? Because you keep asking us to focus on the second one.
And that's all I'm asking tonight. I'm not asking you to render any judgment with regard to what happened in 2017, because that the court is going to render judgment on.
So you're asking us to, I guess as a threshold matter for my purposes, you're not asking us, you're asking us to consider in the context of an appeal the propriety of this 2018 modification.
That's exactly right. All I'm asking you to do, there's an approval in front of you, signed by Mr. Clause and by Ms. Sesto. The date on it is September 27, 2018. I'm asking you to declare that null and void for two reasons.
One is it's dealing with something that happened in 17. What's the second reason?
It's right in front of you.
Okay, let's go through that.
You notice that on the first page of Mr. Clause's approval, do you notice he's exercising his powers under Section 12 of your regulations? It says that on page 1 of his approval. I've highlighted it in yellow.
Is there an approval for 17?
Nothing like that, no.
What is there for 17?
Some written language on the bottom of a piece of paper. Yeah. But in order to exercise his power under Section 12.1, first Mrs. Hurst and then Mr. Clause both have to follow the requirements of Section 12.1. That requires that one submit a request on a form provided by the agency. It's called a green sheet. Did anybody walk in September of 2018 with a green sheet request? No. It also requires that an awful lot of stuff accompany that green sheet, including notice to abutters. There are 5. Okay, can I just say one last thing? But before, there are at least 4 abutting landowners that don't know that we're here tonight. and their rights were violated on September 27th of 2018, those people were entitled to notice under Section 7.9. No notice was given before this approval was issued.
Pat, would you, from our standpoint, this is
Yes, so working off the original approval, it is very normal for all the professional staff, if something has occurred on-site that an applicant speaks to us with regards to is what they want to do in keeping with the intent of the permit. And that's what our goal is when we evaluate changes to the site plan, is the original intent of the agency intact. So in this case, the limit of fill went no further out than the approved limit of fill. And the amount of fill over the septic system, this 300 cubic yards that has been referenced, is in no way limits or modifies that ultimate limit of fill. So it was Bob's position, and consistent with condition number 8 of the permit, to say this is a field change. It did not materially change the permit that was already issued. So that's what occurred. That was the stamp on the plan. We have a stamp, because this is a rather routine thing that we do, to say this is the update. The permit is still fully intact. There's no legal notice that comes with that, because it's not considered a formal action of the agent. It's simply a statement of permit consistency, or an acknowledgement of permit consistency. From that action, when the neighbors took exception to that, that's when this appeal was filed in courts, saying that there was a notification defect, because there was, since it wasn't an action of like a authorization issuing of a permit, then that gets published. This is just a statement or an acknowledgement of consistency with a previously issued permit.
okay. Would you just discuss, though, the two different approvals, the September 8,
Yes.
17 approval and the rationale for the September 27, 18 approval?
So the first approval.
Before you do that, so Pat, are you saying that the 2017 approval from the agency's point of view is not procedurally defective? That no notice was required, the stamp was adequate in the circumstances?
That's correct.
And that stands alone on its face as valid as far as you're concerned?
That is correct.
Okay.
So once the appeal was filed, in order to provide the opportunity.
But you're
for
not
this
talking about the appeal, you're talking about the Superior Court action.
Superior Court action.
Challenging the approval to begin with.
Correct.
There was no appeal made of that first.
Not to this agency, correct.
Right.
And
Okay.
if the argument was you couldn't have made an appeal to this agency because there was no legal notice, I would definitely argue there was no need for a legal notice, because we were simply stating a consistency of a previously noticed permit. But in acknowledgement of these exhausting administrative opportunities, that's where the 2018 document comes in, which articulates the action that Bob took and why, and under what.
Why was that initiated?
To fill the gap. You'll have to speak to the lawyers on that one, Mr. Whitmore. In order to avoid misunderstanding regarding the review and findings of the agency staff described herein above, the undersigned has determined that clarification herein is desirable. And that was then noticed in the paper, which gives the period of time in which the action of the agent could then be appealed to the agency.
Again, just so I'm clear, so at some point in time after the Superior Court action was filed, you consulted with town council?
Yeah, oh, yes.
And town council recommended
This is
that
a
you.
way to clarify what occurred in 2017.
So when did the Superior Court action start? When was that initiated?
A few months ago.
So prior to the September
Yes.
27th?
Yes.
Clarity.
May I?
Oh, wait a minute, no, there's a sequence here, I'm just.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll answer questions, and then I'll sit down.
When did you initiate the appeal to the Superior Court?
It was not an appeal. It was a
You
direct
characterized it
action
direct-
lawsuit.
When was that initiated? Date?
I don't have a precise date, but it was a few months ago.
Bill, make sure you turn on your microphone.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to understand.
It was before September of 2018.
Okay, so in response to their filing, whatever that action was, we then, for, as it says, to avoid misunderstanding regarding blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
we then on September 27 did this.
And through the legal notice of this, afforded the Saids and their attorney this opportunity.
Okay.
So what the agency should be looking at this evening is if they feel that the authorized agent acted within his jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction is as an authorized agent, but then pursuant to special condition number 8, which clearly states that the agent shall deal with the grading, approval of the grading. So if the agency,
But we have to opine, just picking up your words, we have to opine whether we think Bob acted appropriately on September 8 of 2017.
no,
Okay.
because the
When
appeal to
exactly?
the agency is
So-
this document.
Okay.
I don't agree with that.
Well, that's
I don't
that's
agree with
why
that.
I'm raising the point.
I think in light of what you just said, we are not doing that. This is one approval, and that approval was modified in 2018 on advice from your counsel, as a matter of fact,
Yes.
because of the filing of the Superior Court action. And my view, Mr. Fulton, is you didn't exhaust your administrative remedy at the proper time, and that this is not a standalone approval that's subject to appeal at this point. I think if you're here at all properly, it's to appeal the challenge, the first ruling in 2017, and as Mr. Jander points out, you've already exercised your option to do that in a Superior Court. So I don't think you're here properly.
If I may, Mr. Skoufalos, you've made an excellent point. We very much do want to be in court to have the court decide whether the 2017 actions of Mrs. Hurst and Mr. Clausy were appropriate. The September 27, 2018 document that's in front of you is a contrived document.
I don't accept
Isn't that for the court
It was
to decide?
followed.
The innuendo in your submissions about backroom and sort of, very, very negative aspersions, I think now ought to be retracted now that I hear that this was done in consultation with town council. So I don't accept that.
Can I tell you why it was done?
Is this a
Why, what was
speculation?
2 weeks after it was published in the newspaper, which gave me a right to appeal, Mrs. Hurst's lawyer moved to dismiss the court action because he's saying, well, because we made amends for what happened in 2017 by doing what we did in September of 2018, Mr. Fulton now has an administrative remedy to exhaust, and one must exhaust administrative remedies before one may go to court. Now,
Frankly, I don't think that's a terrific argument, but we're not here to decide that.
No,
Okay,
and
so
not only is it not a
my
terrific-
view, and I don't, you have every right to speak and clarify, but you've made that point several times, is we're talking about a request at this point to deal with the 2017 approval. That's what we're dealing with here, as far as I'm concerned. I think this 2018 modification is a modification of the 2017 approval. And the question then becomes whether this appeal, insofar as it's being brought with regard to a 2018 modification, is even something we ought to be considering. I think not. I think that's a basis for saying you can deny the appeal, I think. But I'd like to hear more. But
Mr. Skoufalos, I respectfully disagree with your point, and I agree with what Ms. Sesto pointed out. We are here tonight only appealing what happened on September 28th of this year, And your point, the greatest Chief Justice of all time was named John Marshall, and I think he's rolling over in his grave by when he read Mr. Fogarty's motion to dismiss our court case, because he said back in 1830, don't you understand, if subject matter jurisdiction exists on the date the complaint is filed, it cannot be dispossessed by things that happen afterwards? You can't then contrive and make an administrative remedy after the fact to try to move to dismiss a lawsuit. I'm expecting to prevail on the motion to dismiss, but what I'm pointing out to you is this September 22nd, and I apologize if the word contrived is offensive.
It is offensive.
Okay, I'll use a different.
Worked with Mr.
Okay.
For 10 years.
Okay, well, I will use.
You yourself praised him, so
I think
a bit of innuendo I found offensive.
It is, may I call it a device? Was a device precedent to a motion to dismiss. It was a device prepared so that an argument could be made, well, you now have an administrative remedy, you can't be in court anymore. Now, I don't know how a judge is going to rule, but I better not take my chances. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict how a judge is going to rule, so I brought this appeal here tonight.
Well, can I just ask, what's the ultimate outcome here, just theoretically, admittedly, theoretically? If there is an administrative deficiency, let's assume that is granted. So what? What happens?
In tonight's...
well, just broadly. I don't care whether it's...
Then the only issue remains, if you find that this exercise by Mr. Clausy was not properly undertaken in September of this year, then I'm asking you to declare it null and void, sustain my appeal, and then we're left with the issue in court as to whether the 2017 actions were proper.
Why can't you bring all those arguments in court? You can amend your complaint if you need to. You brought in the case originally. We should be precluded from interfering with what is currently pending in the Superior Court.
And you are indeed not interfering with it.
Well, if we make a ruling on any of your requests, we would be essentially saying to the Superior Court, we have decided that Mr. Clausy's action is appropriate or is not appropriate, when this is an argument that you should now be bringing in the court case that you yourself or your clients have asked you to file.
Mr. Jander, I've asked for only one thing in this appeal, if you look at my appeal, and that's, I want you to declare that Mr. Clausy did not have power on September 28th of 2018 to enter that so-called approval.
Fine, and if we were to do such a thing, what's the next thing you're going to do? You're going to go and take that decision and file it with the Superior Court.
No.
So what are you going to do with it?
What happens?
What good is it?
What happens if you get someone to say there was an administrative deficiency? Then what?
Then we don't have to worry about what happened in September of this year, and we only have to fight what happened in September of last year in the court where that fight is pending.
So 17.
Yes.
So if you had an administrative judgment favorable to you on the September 18 matter, you then shift your focus to September 17, and you would challenge the underlying ruling that we all made? Is that implicitly where you're going? Well, what's the issue that you'd then be going to for 17?
Can you explain to us what relief you are seeking in Superior Court, please?
I'm seeking in the Superior Court a declaratory judgment that Mr. Clausy did not have the power to sign off on the bottom of that piece of paper on September 8th of 2017. And I realize that
Okay.
there's a difference of opinion on that
Okay,
point.
and if you got that judgment, the consequence is what?
In the second count, I'm asking the court to order that the fill be removed.
Okay, that's where you're ultimately, okay, just so I could see what
No,
this
excellent question, Mr. Galvin.
No, but I mean, we're trying to get back to what we would consider a classic wetlands issue. And
I understand
back
that,
to
and I'm
Mr. Benton's
being
point.
a pain in the neck, because all I've come to you tonight with is a procedural issue.
Yes.
Right, that's the first thing you've said that I completely agree with,
Okay.
that you're being a pain in the neck.
Mr. Benton,
But here's the point. How can you go to court and request the removal of 300 cubic feet of fill, not knowing whether there's any impact to the wetlands? I can see going and saying, hey, we want this plan reviewed, but why would you go and say, pull it out, unless you just want to be a real pain to your neighbor?
well,
You don't know whether this has any impact on the wetlands whatsoever.
my
You have
client,
said that repeatedly, that you don't know whether it has any effect. Yet you're coming here and you're saying, I want it out?
Okay. Mr. Benton, we do have three very distinguished professionals who are working on that aspect right now.
But you don't know now.
Okay.
I don't know tonight,
That's
but I do.
Enough.
But, Mr. Benton,
Okay. I guess I'd like to hear from Mr. Cohen. Are you planning on giving a perspective on this? I figure you weren't here to, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Harris. Bruce Cohen, and I represent Mr. and Mrs. Hurst, who have been the subject of two lawsuits brought by Mr. Fulton's clients. Not only two lawsuits, but also a requirement that the Hursts go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for an entirely new special permit approval, which we did, and that was approved by Planning and Zoning, and that's been appealed now by Mr. Fulton's client, so we're in court on that. Mr. Fulton's clients brought this action against this agency and my clients for the reasons that he indicated. Just a couple of points. When this permit was first granted in 2015, everybody got notice. And as already has been pointed out, Mr. and Mrs. Zahid made no objection to that. They made no objection to condition number 8, which specifically allowed changes to be made within 50 feet of the wetland by staff. It was that authority that staff exercised when in 2017, Mr. Clausey approved the regrading plan, and it was regrading. We weren't just dumping for the sake of dumping. We were regrading a hill along the lines that the section and plan that Mr. Clausey handed out indicated. The purpose of the lawsuit, I really can't imagine, because the reason that this is before you tonight was to provide Mr. and Mrs. Zahid with the opportunity to have a hearing before this agency. I fully expected that there would be a hearing, a substantive hearing, along the lines that Mr. Fulton had suggested when he wrote to the town council earlier this year in a letter that Mr. Fulton wrote to John Wetmore, dated July 31st, 2018, at the time that this matter was pending before the Planning and Zoning Commission. He specifically stated that what was wrong about what my clients, the Hursts, were doing was the same procedural issues that you've heard tonight. That where an activity qualifies for duly authorized agent review, the applicants shall submit 3 collated copies of the application and supporting documentation. Notice to abutting landowners who could have easily petitioned to have full agency review. The duly authorized agent decision would have had to have been published, and our client, Mr. and Mrs. Zahid, would have had a right of appeal. We sort of thought that that's what the Zahids were getting at in bringing this lawsuit against this agency. So in consultation with the town attorney and your staff, we published the notice of the 2018, in effect, modification or clarification of the original decision that was made in September of 2017. Gave notice to Mr. Fulton, gave notice by publication. He availed himself of this appeal, and I fully expected that this was going to be an appeal of the substance of that application.
In other words, you filed, that was an approach taken to allow him to exhaust his administrative remedy.
It was indeed.
And you're saying that the substance of the administrative remedy is what should be on appeal tonight?
Exactly.
As opposed to whatever
The
this
procedural issue
2018...
that Mr. Fulton described.
Do you have an opinion as to whether this appeal should be focused solely on this 2018 approval? Or do you agree that, with me, that it's a modification of 17?
I agree with your last comment, Mr. Skoufis, about the fact that it really is one application.
So we're really looking at 17.
We are.
To the extent he wants to have...
Reading through...
To the extent he wants to have an administrative remedy.
Correct. He's asked for an administrative remedy.
Correct.
This is it. We're here before you, and we expected to
You still
hear
have
more.
a motion pending to dismiss in Superior Court for failing to exhaust administrative remedies?
We do, because we believe that
And
this
if we don't-
agency should be the starting point. Now, if he doesn't succeed, would he appeal that? Would he go back to court based upon past performance? I'm sure he would. But I do think that this is the beginning point. This is the proper beginning point, and at least it addresses that comment that Mr. Fulton made to John Wetmore, that he was deprived of a right of appeal. This should be it, and he's taken an appeal.
Excuse me, Mr. Cohen, could you just state again the rationale for why you did the September 18 restatement in consultation with staff and with John Wetmore?
September 27th?
Yes, September 27th. In other words, the rationale for issuing that, which was in the context, it seems, of the P&Z issues going on at the time.
No, the
It wasn't?
P&Z issues had been resolved. P&Z,
Okay, this followed that. So what was it, what initiated the thinking to put out this clarification, or
Yes.
however you want to characterize it?
the fact that Mr. Fulton's clients went to the Superior Court and brought a separate action against this agency and our clients to have the fill removed without this agency having had an opportunity to listen to his arguments on an administrative level. In other words, the folklore that Mr. Fulton talked about, which is you've got to exhaust your administrative remedies, is important to the judicial system because they believe that local administrative agencies have more local expertise and understanding of the situation than they do. And in other words, they want to hear from an administrative agency. So we agreed with Mr. Fulton that this agency should not be deprived of that opportunity. And we wanted, frankly, to blunt that point that he was making, that it was done unfairly, that this agency didn't have a chance to study the situation and decide whether or not Mr. Clausey was correct when he granted a field change approval, which is what he did.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the 2017 approval required notice to abutting neighbors and others?
We don't, because of condition number 8 of the permit.
You believe there was no procedural defect in...
Correct, I do. I believe that the permit specifically allowed field changes as as it's done all the time. And the idea of not permitting an after-the-fact approval, you did one tonight in a case of what I assume was a violation. Why? Because the law allows you to do it, notwithstanding what you may have heard tonight.
Okay.
Any other questions?
If the idea is that you, and you were thinking too, that that the Zarit's, through their attorney, could and should exhaust their administrative remedies by having an administrative appeal, do you agree that then the previously filed lawsuit should be withdrawn, probably without prejudice, until a substantive appeal is heard here, that you should not have both entities, us and a pending court case going on at the same time?
That is correct. And I thought that by virtue of taking this appeal that's before you tonight, we were going to have that administrative hearing. But Mr. Fulton says that he still has experts working on the wetlands issues.
But then this current court case should have been dismissed before we started going down this road on this hearing.
No, because Mr. Fulton is quite right. You never know how judges react, and Mr. Fulton has made some excellent arguments why that motion shouldn't be granted, so the case may go on anyway. But I do think that it's very important that his clients have the right and the obligation to come before this agency. When Mr. Fulton says to you that he can't tell you the wetlands impact, let me tell you that I first knew that the Zahids had contacted a lawyer over a year ago. And I knew that because I got a letter about the situation from Robinson and Cole, who at that time was representing Mr. and Mrs. Zahid. They've since been replaced by Mr. Fulton's firm. And he explained in great detail the wetlands impact. And throughout this, the hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission, wetlands impact was discussed. Mr. Fulton has engaged the Rizzoli firm and others to assess what happened at this site and what the impact was. I can assure you that we wouldn't have gone to Mr. Clausey to approve this field change if we hadn't satisfied ourselves through our own consultants that there was no wetland impact, there was no drainage impact. And obviously staff agreed with that. So I think the idea that, well, he's not ready to present his case to you, that's not right. He took an appeal. Tonight is the hearing on the appeal, and my request to you is that it be denied.
Thank you.
My suggestion is you proceed with your appeal of the 2017 approval as modified in 2018, and you can either argue it's procedurally defective or you can argue it's substantively an incorrect decision, and we can either decide tonight or take it under advisement. But if you don't intend to do that and insist that the limited scope of our review here is what you're calling an approval in 2018, then I would move to deny it.
I understand, Mr. Skoufalos. I'm going to argue the 2017 problems in the Superior Court. I intend to attempt to convince a judge of the Superior Court that a decision to deposit 30 truckloads of fill in an upland review area without notice to anybody is not a simple field change that can be.
But you're not asking us.
Undertaken.
You're not asking us to decide that.
Correct.
So you're not choosing to exercise your administrative remedy tonight.
No, Mr. Skoufalos, I do not. it's very kind of you to, if you're extending to me an offer to argue an appeal tonight of something that was done in 2017. But you don't have any right to extend that right to me, and I have no right to do it.
Why, because it's untimely?
Because there are procedures in your regulations for taking appeals. And one must appeal within 15 days of publication of something that happened in 2017 that was never published. And I'm asking the court to declare.
And I'm just, to be clear, at least from my point of view, on the record, if this isn't a modification, which I believe it is, and you're timely appealing, you are, I assume, taking the position you're timely appealing the 2018 modification, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're proper...
I call it an approval because that's what Mr. Clausy called it.
Fine, we can agree to disagree. If you're timely appealing that approval or that modification, you're doing so only on procedural grounds, and you're not addressing substantively the underpinning of that approval, which is the 2017 decision. Is that right?
That's right, because on the first page of Mr. Clausy's September 27, 2018 approval, he said that he was exercising his authority under Section 12 of the regulations to grant this approval.
Okay, so my view is...
And that was done without notice to anybody, so it is defective, in my estimation.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to move on this.
Right.
And I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your patience and for hearing me out tonight. Thank you very much.
We don't need to decide this tonight, correct?
Right.
I mean, I think we've learned that council for a town has been involved in this. I think we have a lot to absorb here. There are some very nuanced procedural issues that I'm grappling with as a lawyer and an agency member, and I'm sure, others are as well. I think I've stated, if I had to vote tonight, my vote would be to deny this appeal because of the parameters Mr. Fulton's putting around it and making it an appeal of a 2018 approval, which I think mischaracterizes what it is. I think it was an attempt to correct or modify or clarify is an even better word. So, but I'm perfectly happy to defer that vote.
Well, what will we learn if we defer?
I think you can all, well, Pat can help with this, but I think we could get some more information from Mr. Wetmore.
I don't know. What new information can we receive after tonight on this matter?
Well, individually, if you feel comfortable with what you've heard this evening and want to move, that's your call to make. You can make a motion. If you feel you want to ruminate on what's been discussed tonight, I agree. This is a nuanced thing. This is a highly, an unusual approach, which we don't get to see, thankfully. So it's at this point a personal comfort level. If there are outstanding questions that any of you have, I'm more than happy to take those back to Mr. Wetmore and receive that clarification. Or if you'd like him to attend the next meeting, I certainly can extend that.
Well, I'd like to poll the agency and just see if people feel comfortable, voting members, if they feel comfortable making a call tonight, or if they'd like to wait a month.
Pat, we do have to have a public vote whenever we have it, right?
That's correct.
And we cannot privately confer with one another. Is that correct also?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
You could not have executive session with Mr. Wetmore on the appeal for this evening. You could have an executive session with Mr. Wetmore with pending litigation.
Got it.
But don't we have pending litigation here? We're being
So you
sued.
could discuss the pending litigation. It would, and I would totally defer to Mr. Wetmore.
Okay.
The appeal of Bob's decision
Yep.
before the
Okay.
agency stays public.
Got it. So let's,
Joe, do you want to vote tonight or postpone?
I'm not sure that I would come to any other conclusion other
Okay.
than what I already have.
okay, Norma,
That's my feeling.
The same.
Bill,
Okay, three of us, same feeling.
Elliot?
Well, I'm still confused, because I think we're dealing with two different things. One is substantive and the other is procedural. And as I understand it, we don't have any substantive information, and the procedural stuff is before the courts. So therefore, I'm perfectly happy to make a decision tonight on the substantive part of this question,
procedural question.
which is absent.
He's choosing to not advocate an appeal on the basis of the substantive aspect of it.
Well, that's the only basis that personally I can.
He's only focusing on whether what he's calling the 2018 approval is procedurally proper.
Okay.
If we're ready to vote on that, let's vote.
Okay,
I could vote tonight.
okay,
Same with me.
all right.
Stefan, frame a motion.
Would you like to frame a
Want me to make a
motion?
motion?
Yeah, make a
Sure.
motion.
Yeah, I would vote that we deny this appeal based on the parameters that Mr. Fulton has set forth, which is that he's considering this to be a procedurally defective approval. I don't believe it's an approval of 2018. I think it's a modification of 2017. I explicitly asked him if he wanted to exercise his administrative remedies, which he's entitled to do in front of this agency, with regard to what I consider to be the substantive approval dating back to the decision in 2017. He chose not to and wants to insist that this appeal is simply about the 2018 approval and the procedural protocols for which it was produced. And on that basis, I think his parameters are misplaced, and I would vote to deny it.
Second.
All in favor?
Let's have a conversation.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry.
Okay.
Discussion.
It seems to me that in 2017, a field change was made as per Bob's deposition and as per Section 8 of the approval, the 2015 approval. Therefore, it seems to me that no notification was required at that point. And what was done in 2018 was perhaps a modification of that action, but in no way is improper. So I would vote to deny.
Okay, very good. And I would agree with that in terms of Bob acted within his jurisdiction and within, and according to Section 8 of the special conditions.
Any other comments?
Any other discussion?
No.
Comments?
Well,
Okay.
you want to get their votes?
We're just going to ask for all in favor. All in favor for the stated motion? Aye.
Close?
Okay, it's
He's not
unanimous.
Oh, he's not voting, sorry.
Okay. There we have it. Thank you. Okay.